For Monday, that weather system starts to pull away. It turns drier and brighter from the west through the day, sunny spells, but the wind's starting to come in from the northwest, starting to feel cooler, and that colder air filtering further south as we head towards the middle of the week with temperatures below average for the time of year. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 2 years today since Queen Elizabeth II passed away.
As the nation pays tribute to Britain's longest reigning monarch and King Charles prepares to mark his accession day.
With a new memorial in St James's Park announced to honour the 70-year rule of our late Queen.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer plays the blame game as he claims the Conservatives are responsible for what he's calling a broken NHS.
The annual trade union meeting gets underway in Brighton as TUC members claim workers are being cheated out of holiday pay.
And the countdown is on to Tuesday's television debate between former US President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. But it's not without controversy as Trump hits out at Harris's friendship with the TV network's boss.
And as the National Trust announces plans to make half of its cafe items vegan, We're debating whether the move is unfair to farmers or even, perhaps, hypocritical.
Flood warnings remain in place after a stormy night with warnings that power cuts could be on the way.
Good morning. It's going to be a very wet day with some thunderstorms across central and southern parts of the UK. Find out all the weather details with me coming up in a little bit.
Good morning. England are off to a flyer in the Nations League with victory over the Republic of Ireland in Dublin. New interim manager Lee Carsley kept his pledge not to sing the national anthem, and now legendary football boss Harry Redknapp has weighed in on the debate.
He agrees with me and not Aidan. Good one, Harry. Just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Emma Webb. Well, Emma Trimble now. And this is GB News Breakfast.
Morning, Aidan.
Good morning.
Are you disappointed with Harry?
A little bit. I thought I could depend on him. I go back a long way with him. You know, I was a young whippersnapper asking him questions when he was a West Ham manager, and I thought, the loyalty, the trust from going back that far would.
He'd agree with you.
Yeah, but he's just gone completely against me. No, he gave it a peek. We'll discuss it in depth later on. He did speak out in the Sun yesterday, saying he likes to see all sports stars or anybody inside or out of sport belting out the national anthem.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's quite poignant. I did think that earlier on it's quite poignant with the 2-year anniversary of the his death, isn't it? I suppose, but I still haven't changed my opinion.
I just think after all the hoo-ha there was yesterday, Lee Carsley should have had the common sense to say, well, I'll at least mumble it.
I don't know how anyone can listen to the national anthem and not want to sing along.
Ours is. Don't you think ours is a bit boring?
No, not at all.
Compared to some of the others?
No.
You wouldn't put it in as a Eurovision entry, would you?
No, you won't. But
I think it's an absolute banger.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far. Anyway, look, Aidan, we'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says Britain's National Health Service has been broken by the Conservatives' 14-year reign. A review due to be published this week will highlight how children are being let down with falling vaccination rates, increased ADHD diagnosis and a rise in eating disorders.
Joining us now is political commentator Andy Williams. Good morning, Andy.
Morning.
So is Keir Starmer right that the NHS is broken? They've obviously commissioned this new report that has we're expecting some pretty rotten findings. Do we expect that they're going to pin that on the Conservative government, or are they going to sort of take the bull by the horns?
No, I think it's both. So I think you have to acknowledge that after 14 years of Conservative government, the NHS is in a complete mess. On every single measure, performance has plummeted, and I know. And before we even go there, it's not just the result of COVID and the pandemic. So if you look at waiting lists, they doubled from 2.3 to 4.6 million in the 10 years prior to COVID. Waiting times for treatment massively went up. And by the way, this isn't for a lack of investment or spending. The one thing in some ways you have to give the last government credit for is they kept investing loads and loads of money in the NHS. Spending went up massively, but we're spending £178 billion a year on the NHS. And it's not working for people.
No, well, this is the key point, because up until Wes Streeting took the health brief, Labour's mantra has always been, it needs more money. And to be fair, the unions go, it needs more money. Well, it hasn't been, as you say, it hasn't been short of money.
No, it hasn't at all.
So why is this the government's fault and not actually NHS Trust's fault, the infrastructure fault?
Well, there are clearly issues there. I mean, the organisation as a whole is not working. The senior leadership can't be performing as well as it could be, nor can the management, because, I checked this out. So every year for the last 75 years, on average, NHS spending has gone up by 3.6% in real terms. So every year for 7 decades, we're giving it more and more and more money. So it's not, as Stephen says, it's not just a question of shoveling more cash in. And I think Wes Streeting is looking at it and going, we're not going to starve the NHS of cash, but what we need to do is completely reimagine how this works and think smarter about it. Because what's been happening over the last 14 years has not worked. And I'm afraid, if you look at the facts on every measure, the NHS was performing better under Labour, and I think it will do again.
Do you think that actually the Labour Party stands a better chance of being able to reform the NHS because it doesn't have the political baggage that the Conservatives would have if they had tried to do the same? So when Wes Streeting comes out and says the NHS should be a service, not a shrine, that he maybe stands a better chance of being able to actually cut out some of that dead wood in things like, you know, overspending on the bureaucracy rather than on frontline workers.
I think that's a good point, but it comes with its own baggage, because then you've got people on the left of the Labour Party and on the left of the political spectrum who will say, oh, you know, they're allergic to any kind of private involvement in the NHS. And I think it has to be pragmatic, has to be a mix, and that is what Wes Streeting is saying. But the reality is that, again, under the last government, they tried all sorts. They tried top-down reorganisation. They tried, you know, spending more and more money. Yes, there was the pandemic, but none of it worked.
No, but that ties into the same point, doesn't it? That actually the Conservatives could not do proper root and branch reform of the NHS because the left would have jumped all over it and said you're destroying, in effect, our shrine.
Well, I think when you have a sizable majority in the House of Commons, and when you're the Secretary of State for the Health or the Prime Minister, you do have a reasonable amount of power over how the NHS works.
No, except that actually any root and branch reform like that isn't going to happen within one government term, is it? It's going to it'll take decades, in effect.
I agree with that, and actually, if in some ways, if Labour said, our priority for the next 10 years is, number one, to put more money back in people's pockets and get the economy growing, and number two, sort the NHS out. If they did nothing else but those two things, that would be a massive achievement. Easier said than done.
Do you think that maybe, even though the Labour Party might be, you know, better placed politically, that in terms of the sorts of reforms they might come out with, just very quickly, do you think that, you know, their hesitance to involve the private sector might mean that actually they don't create the sorts of efficiencies that we need to see in the NHS to solve these problems?
Well, I don't think they are actually that hesitant to involve the private sector. I think Wes Streeting's been really clear that in a variety of areas, whether you look at freeing up space for hospital beds, for example, whether you look at cancer treatment, that there is definitely a role for the private sector. And I think as long as we maintain, in my view, as long as we maintain the fundamentals of the model, that would be a good thing.
All of this is very difficult, though, because of the blame game, isn't it? Because that goes... Could they tackle this without using the blame game? I mean, look, you've got a valid point that we have 14 years of Conservative rule, and this is where we are with the NHS. You know, it's quite hard to argue against that, to be fair. But actually, a more positive spin on all of this, would that help at the moment? Because everything we're getting at the minute is negative from government.
So I'd say two things. One is that the Tories were awful at this. I mean, they were in this general election campaign still talking about blaming Labour and Gordon Brown for the financial crisis a decade and a half ago. So they were doing this for their entire period in government. Having said that, yes, I would like to see Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves take a slightly more positive view, because it's one thing being honest with people, which I respect, and I think it's a good thing that they're levelling with people and not saying we have a, you know, magic bullet solution for everything and we can just cut taxes and everything's going to be fine, which was Liz Truss's prescription. However, the doom and gloom is getting to people, and I also think that part of leadership is sort of, you know, injecting a bit of positivity and optimism into people. So going into the autumn and beyond the budget, I would like to see a bit more of that.
Just a quick one, because actually it's a very good point. Susan's just sent us a message saying, I've lived in Wales for 14 years, where it's been Labour for a very long time, and the NHS is broken here.
Yeah, the outcomes in Wales have been really bad as well.
So why is that? If Labour's got some of the answers, why is it rubbish in Wales?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't know the ins and outs of how the NHS is working in Wales. I know it's been performing badly, but I think if you look at the current the UK Labour government's plans for the NHS, I think they're smarter, and I think there's an opportunity, but it's going to take, as you say, years and years.
OK, Andy, thanks very much indeed.
Not much cause for hope, is it?
Well, you never know. You never know. I like to be optimistic. As someone who uses the NHS a lot, I'd like to be optimistic about it. The people working in it are fantastic. It's just some of the structure needs to be changed, I think. Right, should we have a look at what's happening with the King today? Because he's going to head to church near Balmoral for, understandably, private prayer and reflection in remembrance of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, on this, the second anniversary of her death.
King Charles and Queen Camilla are expected to spend the day at Crathie Kirk Church, where the late Queen worshipped. Royal reporter Cameron Walker reflects on that September day when the country lost one of its most beloved figures and King Charles's life started as head of state.
Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old.
She was like a real inspiration.
She's been very diligent and honourable.
Sending thoughts and prayers to the family and hope, you know, that the transition goes quite smoothly.
It's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne.
Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
Her eldest son became King Charles III, pledging himself to the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
His Majesty's time on the throne has seen celebration, state visits and health scares. The latest YouGov polling suggests 2/3 of the people believe Britain should continue to have a monarchy. Hardly any change since Charles became king, who himself has favourability ratings of 63%. A master of soft diplomacy, the King's overseas visits to France, Germany and Kenya were deemed big successes, cementing Great Britain's place on the world stage. The King was also the first British monarch to address the German Parliament, paying tribute to the deep historical bonds.
Today, it gives me particular pride to be with you once again, now as King, and to renew the special bond of friendship between our two countries.
Despite being 75 years old, the King has continued to throw himself into charity work alongside his constitutional duties. His Majesty launched the Coronation Food Project to support charities feeding disadvantaged Brits. Mindful of the extra money he's made from the Crown Estate's wind farm projects, His Majesty's asked that the profits be redirected to the wider public good.
King Charles is due to go to hospital for the treatment of an enlarged prostate.
The surgery was successful, but further tests diagnosed His Majesty with a separate form of cancer. He was forced to step back from public duties, something his nephew Peter Phillips said deeply frustrated him. The Queen suggested it was difficult to get him to rest instead of overworking himself.
You haven't got too cold.
In April, a glimmer of hope emerged when His Majesty met members of the public on Easter Sunday at Windsor ahead of a phased return to public duties. His first engagement since his cancer diagnosis was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in London, becoming a new patron of Cancer Research UK. Doctors have now given the King the green light to travel to Australia and Samoa next month for an autumn tour, suggesting his health is stable. Yesterday, the King attended the annual Braemar gathering. Today, His Majesty is marking his accession day privately, in the place his reign began. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Let's talk to royal expert Michael Cole, who's in Norfolk. Michael, it's always good to see you, of course. And Cameron beautifully looking at what's been achieved by the King over this difficult couple of years, actually. But it's worth just sitting back, isn't it, and reflecting on Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, because it seems, frankly, unbelievable that it has been 2 years since we lost her.
Yeah, I remember it well. I was on the way to the studio where you're sitting now when I heard the news. Of course, it was an extraordinary reign, record-breaking in every respect. And throughout that reign, the Queen never put a foot wrong. Her size 4 foot went around the world to many, many countries, representing this country in the best possible way. So it's really rather extraordinary to reflect when we see her there, the unkind attack which has just been made upon her memory by Sir Ian McKellen, a man who's done rather well out of royal patronage. He was a Knight of the Realm, he is a Knight of the Realm, and he is a Companion of Honour. And it was the lady we see there who invested him as a Companion of Honour. There's only 65 of those, and that that distinction is given after achievement over a very long period of time. And yet now Sir Ian accuses the Queen of being mad. I mean, that is the most extraordinary claim he makes. I cannot think of any woman in the world or any person who was more down to earth, more sensible, and also very, very astute. We're talking about mad monarchs. Of course, we think of King Lear, and Sir Ian played King Lear 6 years ago. And to slightly misquote Shakespeare, the king says, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless actor." Well, he said daughter, but actor in this case, because it's a clear case of biting the hand that has fed you rather well.
I think many people feel very strongly hearing those criticisms of the Queen, and only 2 years, of course, after she passed away, because people felt so strongly. I remember when she died, how devastated I felt, and going to the lying in state, and everybody will remember where they were when they heard that news. Obviously, as you said, you know, very big shoes for Charles to fill. But do you think that he's made a good go of it, actually, even though he's had, you know, such bad news himself personally, but also within the family, including the Princess of Wales, that Charles is known for being a real workaholic, very much like Princess Anne, a very, very hard worker. Do you think that his first 2 years as monarch, he's sort of successfully stepped into the Queen's shoes? And everybody, I'm sure, would agree that it would be very difficult to outshine her, but that he's done a very good job.
Yeah, Emma, I think you summed it up brilliantly. I think he's been a huge success. Of course, a great act to have to follow. He's doing extraordinarily well, and a short reign, as of course it's compared with hers, it's going to be short, can be very, very successful. His great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, only ruled for 10 years, reigned for 10 years. But people remember that Edwardian era as a golden age and think back on it very fondly. And I think the way the king has started, particularly the 2 state visits, which Cameron highlighted, were a huge success. He had the longest apprenticeship in history, 70 years waiting to become king, and he's fulfilling the role very well despite his own personal difficulties and the challenges that come with being treated for this undisclosed cancer. He looks happy. He looks very fulfilled, and he looks as if he's made for the role. And of course he was. And I think he couldn't have done better, despite the difficulties which personally he's encountering. So I think a good first 2 years, but he will be remembering very closely and very candidly and very acutely the loss of his mother at Balmoral 2 years ago.
He certainly will. Michael, as always, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Let's have a look at some of the other stories heading into the newsroom at 18 minutes past 6.
Former Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething has announced he will not stand for re-election in 2026. In July, he stepped down from the top job after just 4 months following a controversy around £200,000 campaign donation given by a businessman convicted of environmental offences. Ellen Morgan has since taken over, becoming the first woman to lead Wales.
A study into type 2 diabetes says people who stay up late have a higher risk of developing the condition, which means the body doesn't produce enough insulin to regulate blood sugar levels. Researchers are warning night owls are more likely to smoke and have unhealthy diets, which can contribute to the problem.
Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates has married his long-term partner Suzanne in a ceremony officiated by none other than billionaire business tycoon Sir Richard Branson. Sir Richard reportedly invited the couple to holiday on his private island in the Caribbean after the former sub-postmaster said in an interview, "If Richard Branson is reading this, I'd love a holiday."
If Richard Branson is watching this, I'd love a holiday.
Me too. On a Caribbean island.
Yes,
Who wouldn't?
Sadly, I don't think we're going to be invited. I did once ask Sir Richard if I could go on Virgin Galactic
Did it come to anything?
He did say I could have a ticket if I discovered a black hole.
Well, better get busy.
I haven't yet discovered a black hole, but I will. If I ever do, I will hold Richard to that offer. Now, to the other side of the pond, because America's nominee for the Republican Party, former President Donald Trump, held a rally in Wisconsin overnight in his first visit to the deep state.
Trump mistakenly called Leon Musk before ranting about horror film Silence of the Lambs. That's ahead of next Tuesday's television debate with the Democratic Party's candidate Kamala Harris, which will see the pair face off for the first time since Joe Biden stepped down from the race.
Let's talk to US political analyst Eric Ham, who's in Washington. Eric, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for staying up late for us. Look, can we look forward 2 days to the Donald Kamala extravaganza? Because, frankly, this is going to be fascinating, whatever sort of political colours you wear.
That's certainly true. In fact, I suspect that this debate will play very similar to the first time we saw John McCain, the former decorated hero and former U.S. Senator, debate Barack Obama. Many were watching that debate to see if Barack Obama could actually pass the commander-in-chief test, to be able to stand on the stage, particularly in the wake of 9/11, and look presidential, but more importantly, as someone who could stand next to and up to world leaders. And I think people are going to be watching on Tuesday to see if Kamala Harris can also pass that commander-in-chief test. And so this is going to be more about Kamala Harris and far less about Donald Trump.
Kamala hasn't been doing interviews as well. We've seen Donald Trump doing all sorts of podcasts, being very, very willing to talk to the public. And since ABC have imposed these certain rules, restrictions on the debate, Kamala Harris's team seemed to be concerned that this was going to rig things in favour of Donald Trump, things like having the microphones muted whilst the other person is speaking. But now Donald Trump has come out, hasn't he, and said that he thinks that it might have an impact on the way the debate plays out, that Kamala Harris has a long-term friendship with one of the bosses of Disney+.
Well, to be clear, these are the rules that were actually set in place by President Joe Biden. And what we're seeing here is Donald Trump's team basically wanted to keep these rules in place. One of the reasons why Kamala Harris wanted the microphones to not be muted is because she wanted to be able for the audience to actually be able to see Donald Trump possibly unhinged. And clearly that's not going to happen. And in addition to that, this will be hopefully not only an opportunity for people to see Kamala Harris in a very different light, but more importantly for both of these candidates to actually be able to share their vision with the country. Now, of course, we know Donald Trump is certainly no stranger to the histrionics when it comes to debating. But because Kamala Harris hasn't done this since 2020, many people simply don't know if she's up for or what we're actually going to see from her on Tuesday night.
What's going on with Leon Musk and the Silence of the Lambs as far as President Trump's concerned?
Well, look, even though Donald Trump sometimes gets names wrong, what we do know is there is this great affinity between the two mercurial billionaires. Donald Trump has made clear that he would like to see Elon Musk serve in his administration if he is elected. And I think it's something that Elon Musk himself would actually like to do. And so I think clearly what we're seeing here is Donald Trump has an idea and a plan for how Elon Musk can actually work inside the government. We don't know what that will look like or how that will even work. And of course, we know both of these men have a history of falling out with a lot of people. So it's also, I think, very interesting to see, in fact, how long this bromance between these two individuals will actually last.
Well, Donald Trump actually did one of these interviews that I mentioned was with Elon Musk, and it was a very fascinating, candid interview. The two of them clearly got along very well with each other. But this goes back to what I said earlier, which is that Donald Trump has been very open, very candid, not just talking about the assassination attempt, but also about what he stands for, whereas Kamala Harris does seem to be reluctant to engage with the public in quite as open a way. Do you think that the fact that in this debate, one of the rules is that they're not allowed to have pre-written notes and are not allowed to communicate with their teams during the ad breaks, that actually Donald Trump is far more prepared for public scrutiny than Kamala Harris is, given that she seems so reluctant to actually be exposed to that kind of scrutiny?
No, not at all. In fact, typically in these types of settings, in these types of face-offs between presidential candidates, there is no opportunity for them to engage with their staffs or bring notes into these debates. And that's typically something that we have seen negotiated even when the Commission on Presidential Debates was actually running these events. And so I think that's par for the course. We do know that Kamala Harris has been hunkered down in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she is doing debate prep. And we know that these two candidates have very different ways of actually preparing for these debates. And so I think we know that Donald Trump certainly is no stranger and has been engaging. We know that he did a recent series of Q&As with the New York Economic Club. So he is certainly no stranger to taking questions. Kamala Harris, I think one of the reasons why so many people will be watching her is because, in fact, she has not done any of this since becoming the nominee for the party.
Yeah. OK, Eric, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now it's time for a look at the weather with Craig Snell.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
If you've been up half the night like us, you may have hit the thunderstorms. Did you get the thunderstorms?
I was woken up by it.
Oh.
Repeatedly. That's quite exciting.
Oh, it's terrible. I had to say, I couldn't get into the car, but I had an extra 10 minutes at home trying to wait for it to calm down. I'm just going to get drenched walking the 3 feet to the car.
Did you get deluged in the end?
Oh, it's terrible, yeah. Really,
it's quite
really
exciting.
bad.
I could see the lightning coming through the shutters in the bedroom. It was, Yeah.
Exciting.
Missed the best of it, though.
Oh, so if you've put up with that through the night, if it woke you up, you've got a baby or a dog or anything like that that's upset by all of that, oh, I wish you luck. Anyway, should we talk money? Because it's time for the Great British Giveaway now. It's the biggest cash prize we have ever given away.
£36,000 could be yours. That is like having an extra $3,000 tax-free in your bank account each month for the entire year.
Yeah, it's not bad, but you've got to be in it to win it, of course. So here's how.
This is incompetent.
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Right, Aidan's got all the sport for us at 6:34. Morning to you.
Good morning to you both. Good to see you.
We better talk England-Ireland.
Why not? Yeah, well, look, should we focus on what happened on the pitch first of all?
Yeah.
I mean, look, that was a good performance by England. I mean, we saw the handbrake come off in terms of the performance. I think you said yourself many times, watching the Euros, that England felt a little bit within themselves and a little bit reserved when it got to the final third of the pitch and didn't really go for the jugular against especially some of the smaller nations in the European Championships in the summer, in the Euros. But yesterday, it just felt as if they came out the blocks and had something to prove. There were runners moving beyond Harry Kane. They weren't leaving him so isolated. They looked dangerous. And, of course, the two players. You're going to pick two who were going to score goals against Ireland. I mean, Declan Rice scored the first one. He played 3 matches, Emma, for the Republic of Ireland as a teenager, and then he declared for England, and so it was a bit emotional going back for him, and he didn't celebrate the goal.
Oh, didn't he?
No, he didn't, and he said afterwards, "I'm sorry for scoring against my or Ireland, I should say my country, but it's not anymore." Jack Grealish, on the other hand, was completely different.
Yeah.
He was giving it the ears to the crowd, and he's putting his fingers in his ears and closing his eyes as if to say, "I don't care what you think about what I've done." And so it was very cocky, but, you know, he had the juxtaposition of reactions. But if you're going to pick two players, I mean, there was a there was a banner in the crowd, actually. I mean, I wouldn't say the atmosphere was toxic or anything like that, but there was a banner held up by the home crowd saying, and we all know about St Patrick was believed to have ushered the snakes out of Ireland, and then they held up a banner with a picture of Rice and Grealish saying the snakes are back.
No, that's great.
I know, so it's brilliant. And so the 2-0 win, decent performance, took the handbrake off a little bit into late, early on in the game, and then kind of, I wouldn't say withdrew into themselves, but they've got a game on Tuesday, don't forget, so they need to keep themselves fresh for that.
Mind you, there was no national anthem from the manager.
No, well, this is funny because we all know about Lee Carsley's history with Ireland. He played for them 40 times. He played for them a World Cup. His grandmother comes from Cork. He actually walked out of the tunnel and went to the wrong dugout. He went to the Ireland dugout instead of the Ireland one. Now, whenever that happens, it always gets caught on camera because that's exactly where the snappers tend to be, by the tunnel. But he refused to sing. He stood by his pledge not to sing the anthem. And Harry Redknapp weighed in on the debate in The Sun today, in The Sun on Sunday. And I'll just read out his quote. He said,
go on, Harry.
He said, "It doesn't matter where you're from. For me, if you're in charge of an English team, you should sing it in 99% of circumstances at least." Now, he did go on to qualify it by saying that Lee Carsley is between a rock and a hard place here because obviously he has that history with Ireland and there's the England situation as well. But he said if you're playing a regular international against Spain or France, you should really do it. We disagree on that.
How's that gone down with fans?
The supporters in the ground didn't really make much reference to him and they just enjoyed the win. But
Could they maybe not see that he
It's difficult to know. I think there's a little bit of separation, Emma, between people who have an opinion on it who aren't necessarily football fans and football fans themselves. I don't think football fans care about it as much as you think, although there is still a feeling that they would like, in an ideal world, for the England managers to sing the national anthem. My issue yesterday was that there were players in the summer playing for England who didn't sing it. We've known situations before. I remember Vinnie Jones playing for Wales and he just didn't know the word. He was reminiscent of John Redwood going to being the Welsh secretary in 1995 and not being able to...
Is the Welsh national anthem in Welsh?
Yeah, I believe, yes, it is.
Probably, I think I can see why he might not.
Yeah, I know. And so yeah, that was probably a little bit embarrassing for those two. But yeah, we've seen players not do it. England managers in the past, particularly the foreign ones, haven't said it. I just wonder whether the solution to this in future might just be to take the manager out the firing line so they don't have to participate in the national anthem.
Or just insist that they sing it.
Can you really force someone to sing, though?
I think you should.
What about you, Emma? Do you think
I don't know. I feel like maybe you shouldn't be the captain of the England team if you're not willing to sing the national anthem. Or any team, in fact.
Well, look, one thing is that it's a batsman... it's a kind of horrible football cliché. It was a baptism of fire in terms of... In terms of him going into the Lions' Den.
You don't mind the cliché. Oh, a few clichés there.
My cliché game is right at top
all the
notch
metaphors
today.
this morning.
But look, that's somebody who has managed at representative level. Somebody who hasn't had many frontline roles. Certainly nothing like the size of the England job. And then he walked into that storm yesterday just for something, I imagine, from his point of view. After he said it, he probably just thought, well, I'll be lucky to make 6 paragraphs.
I'm definitely one of those non-football fans who has an opinion on this without caring very much about the game.
No. Well, it does. It is an argument that gets out. You don't have to be a football aficionado to have an opinion.
I care about the national anthem more than I do about football. But what about the latest on the Paralympics? Because we've got a very large number of medals.
I can't remember too many days in the Paralympics where we haven't had good days. Team GB have been absolutely outstanding. We'll have a look at the medals table in a minute. In fact, we've got it there now.
120.
120. So 20 medals yesterday. 5 of those golds to back up the 6 golds that we won the previous day. This is the penultimate day. We have another round of action today, of course. But as we were yesterday and last week, one behind China. China have an advantage, of course, because they enter more athletes than everybody else and they take the Paralympics extremely seriously as well, to their credit. But 120 medals in total for Team GB. 47 golds. I'll just... go through some of the standout performers yesterday. Hannah Crockcroft in the 800-metre track event getting gold. That's her 9th Paralympic title. That's why you've heard that name before. In the para-canoeing, Emma Wiggs and Charlotte Henshaw combined to win gold, and Stephen Clegg in the pool swimming. We've been absolutely outstanding in the pool, in the Olympics and in the Paralympics this time. The 100-metre butterfly final winning there as well. So you have to doff your cap to that. And the possibility of more today. We're going to see a closing ceremony today, I believe, and so it's been a huge success for and I just think the Paralympics is getting bigger and bigger each time.
It is. And Finley Graham on the bike as well.
Yeah, outstanding. Did really well.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Do we know how many medals we could get today for our final total?
Don't know. I'll check, though, for the next hour. That's my homework for the next...
Nice. If we can hit that 140, if we get another 20 medals today, I don't know if we're...
There's usually a truncated schedule on the last day because you've got to fin the schedule, but you've got, you know...
Well, any chance of beating China?
No.
No, I think that was always a tough ask. But, you know, you measure it up commensurate to the number of athletes you put in, and I think pound for pound, I think we've done very well,
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Aidan, thanks very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on. We've got the papers heading away with Suzanne Evans and Andy Jones. That's in just a moment.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
On Tuesday, the 3rd of September, at St Paul's Church in Wilton Place in London, a lucky few will sing highlights from Mozart's Don Giovanni in front of a paying audience with an orchestra and under the baton of Gary Matthewman, the conductor and artistic director of Brunswick Vocal Arts. Why is it important that young singers have this opportunity with an orchestra?
There's a gauntlet, if you like, that I think lots of young singers have to run between finishing the relative comfort of their conservatory education and becoming firmly established as professional singers. Lots of the ones who show real verve and real promise and work really hard end up for a little bit too long being trapped in a kind of cycle of being the understudy, but some of them are ready to kind of go that extra mile and reach that next milestone. And we as a charity thought, well, what a lovely thing it would be to handpick some of these best young singers, give them intensive coaching on the role that they're going to perform, give them the chance to work with professional players for the first time, and crucially, have the thing professionally filmed and recorded. Because the first question all young singers are asked when they meet somebody influential now is, well, what's your website?
You have coached the singer, coaching the singer either towards a recital or towards their performance, their part in an opera. Tell me a little bit about that process.
It's a case of asking them questions which make them bring a character to life, so that when an audience member witnesses this person singing, they don't just think, oh, that's a pretty noise. They think, oh, there's something going on here that I recognise. And especially in a context like this, which is related, I think, to when people sing recitals. Say they sing 20 songs in that one evening, they've got to present 20 roles, 20 mini operatic roles, if you like. And we need to see the change in their bearing. We need to see the change in their approach to the text, as well as to the kind of the technical focus of their singing and how they produce sound.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Right, time to have a look at the front pages for you this morning. We'll start with the Mail on Sunday, leading with business experts issuing a warning to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, as she reportedly plots a tax raid in next month's budget.
And in The Observer, reports on a damning new finding that Britain was hit harder by COVID-19 than other countries thanks to Conservative policies.
The Times, Sunday Times, we should say, leads with leaked reports that Great Ormond Street Hospital is conducting an urgent review into the cases of 721 children left with life-changing injuries by the same surgeon.
It's terrific. And finally, The Mirror leads with Oasis apparently in talks to take their tour global with gigs in the US, Mexico and Argentina.
Right, let's see what our guests make of all of that. Political consultant Suzanne Evans and the journalist Andy Jones. Morning to you both. Suzanne, let's have a look at the Mail on Sunday, should we? And the Chancellor and what's going to happen in the budget.
Yes, so basically, Chancellor is plotting, we're told, all kinds of huge tax rises, which have scared a lot of wealthy people in the country. And this is the latest in a series of reports, this time from a wealth manager called Henley & Partners. They're saying that 9,500 millionaires are set to quit Britain because the taxes that she's going to levy on wealthy people are just too much. They've had enough. They're going to leave, with Dubai, Switzerland and Portugal said to be the top areas that they're leaving Britain for. Now, as I said, this is the latest report. There have been several others. The boss of CVC Capital, which is the UK's largest private equity firm, was warning the same thing earlier this week, as was the Institute of Directors. Business confidence has plummeted from +7 points before the election to -12 now. There was another report by wealth manager Ayrton Capital, which actually helps people move out of the country. They reckon 83% of their clients are deeply concerned.
Doesn't mean they're going to go, though.
Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go. But even the tax man, even HMRC, is saying that her capital gains tax raid is going to cost the country £2 billion because it's not going to work because people are going to take steps to avoid it. So this is really quite alarming. And if Rachel Reeves isn't listening or wasn't listening, she jolly well ought to start listening now because, you know, there's that famous thing called the Laffer curve, the idea that if you tax people too much, you don't increase tax take is reduced. Famous economist Arthur Laffer, tax take is reduced because actually people go out of their way to avoid their taxes.
I mean, but that falls into the flatter taxes argument, doesn't it? Where actually, if you in effect charge people less tax, you actually bring in more income.
Well, that's Laffer's argument. Absolutely.
But would anyone have the nerve, the courage to introduce that?
Well, Liz Truss tried it, didn't she? She wanted to cap taxes, and look at what happened. The city threw its hands up in horror. The Bank of England went ballistic pretty much, and there was absolute meltdown in the financial markets. But, you know, I don't know that many rich people. But I know some who are leaving. Precisely,
do you really?
I do, absolutely, for precisely this reason. Also, the Daily Mail quotes Charlie Mullins, the founder of Pimlico Plumbers. He's selling up his £12 million penthouse, and he says he's quitting the country because he's not going to stand for the tax increases that he's going to be foisted upon him under a Labour government. So this is serious. I mean, there's just been so many stories now. It's too big you know, it's the momentum's growing. Too many stories about people threatening to leave, and I think they're right.
A lot of younger people are leaving as well. They're not even beginning their careers here. They're going to work abroad because it's easy to get better opportunities abroad than it is here. And we will look at other stories today that these tax cuts aren't just affecting the very wealthy, they're affecting people on very, very low incomes as well. Pensioners are worried about, you know, keeping their bills, keeping their heating on because of the cuts to the winter fuel allowance.
Well, yeah, that's in the Sunday Express, isn't it, Andy? And it's going to prove problematic. Is it a poll tax moment for Keir Starmer?
James cleverly certainly says it is. I mean, obviously he's very interested in being a poll tax moment for Labour. But let's look at the facts. So any pensioners earning have an income of less than $14,000 a year will lose their winter fuel allowance, which is £300, which is significant.
So more than 14,000.
Yeah, if they're on 14,000, they'll lose their £300, and that'll affect around 10 million elderly people. MP Rosie Duffield says people will die because of this fuel tax. 5,000 pensioners last year, it's believed, died of cold.
It's you know, I was a former councillor. I remember looking at excess deaths. You had a colder winter. There's no doubt that those excess deaths went up and old people did die. There's no doubt about it. You mentioned Rosie Duffield. I listened to an interview with her, and she did indeed, you know, stick her line in the sand and say we should scrap this. It should be reversed. But she wasn't going to vote against it.
Yes,
and I think unless Labour MPs actually find the bottle, if this does come to a vote, and there's no guarantee it will, but unless they find the bottle, if it does come to the vote to actually vote against it, it's going to go through.
Yeah.
Suzanne, what about this story in The Observer about COVID pandemic policies?
So this is an interesting one. Basically, there's been a report that's been done by a world-renowned surgeon, Professor Ara Darzi, but he's also a former Labour peer. I just put that in there because I think it's important. Basically concluding that Britain was far harder hit by the COVID pandemic than other countries because the NHS, to the extent to which the NHS shut down during COVID times. So, for instance, hip and knee replacements fell by 46% and 68% respectively. Hospital discharges dropped. And we all know, don't we, it ground to a halt. It became a COVID health service and not a national health service. The thing is, this report concludes that it was the Conservatives to blame, and this is where I take issue with it and why I mentioned that Lord Darcy was a former Labour peer. We all say newspapers have their spin according to their political leanings, and I'm afraid this is typical of the Observer, because who was egging the Conservatives on during COVID lockdowns? At every stage, it was the Labour government, the Labour opposition then, saying there's not enough, we're not going, we should go harder, we should go faster, there should be more COVID restrictions. So to blame the Conservatives, I think, for something that
there wasn't a single Labour MP arguing that we need more hip and knee replacements during the time.
Well, many of them were arguing that they wanted more harder
cuts. Yeah, exactly. But again, also, what happened to all of the Nightingale hospitals we built and all of the money that was spent on sort of this absolutely excessive amounts of PPE and all of these other sort of things. And the other cost of, the other cost of these swinging lockdowns is that, you know, that we've got being hit in other areas. Not only this excess of treatments that we weren't able to do, but also fairly newer treatments. There's over 500,000 children waiting for mental health treatment on the NHS. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to argue that that has been exaggerated by COVID. A lot of these children not being able to school, but, you know, spending extreme hours stuck indoors, etc.
The educational failings as well, the fact we now have a whole cohort of children who can't read or write.
Well, we do, but it's very easy to forget. I mean, we were looking at the time, before the stuff really came in force in the UK, looking at what was happening in Northern Italy, where there were corridors and corridors and corridors of people just dying.
There were.
And so that's what prompted us to take firmer action.
I think it's quite interesting, I think, that China obviously realised, I think it's pretty much beyond dispute now. There might be some people who still argue that this didn't leak from a Chinese lab, but personally I think it did. And I think China clearly realised what it had done, and hence it took an extreme totalitarian communist approach to COVID. I think it's no accident that Italy was the first country to lock down very hard, because they were very much...
Well, they were hit so...
they're very much in line with the Chinese.
We haven't come to any actual conclusions about whether this was a manufactured virus or not. That's not been proved.
We haven't, but what we do know is, I think, had it not happened in China, had China not locked down as hard as it did, I'm not sure the rest of the world would have followed in much the same vein.
We've got under a minute, Andy, to talk about Oasis in the Sunday Mirror. They're going global.
Yeah, I'm a bit sick of hearing about Oasis already, but of course, as they're making £500 million from the UK, they also want to go to US, Mexico, Argentina, wherever else. But obviously, the further they have to travel together, the more likely is there'll be rifts. Because on stage, if they're able to go home and go back to their own houses, if they're performing in Manchester or London or wherever else, obviously they're not going to be able to do that if they're on a plane to Mexico, Argentina, Australia. Yeah, even if they're not doing a tour bus, they'll still be on the same jet with all their other families.
Maybe they won't. Then that sort of money, they can get a jet each, can't they?
Who got tickets, Suzanne?
No, I'm not an Oasis fan.
Oh, funny that. Right, we've got to leave it there, you two. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see you later on. Here's the weather with Craig.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland. with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us, it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You can be that. Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 2 years today since Queen Elizabeth II passed away.
As the nation pays tribute to Britain's longest reigning monarch, and King Charles prepares to mark his accession day.
Well, with a new memorial in St James's Park announced to honour the 70-year rule of the late Queen. There's lots to mark today.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer plays the blame game as he claims the Conservatives are responsible for what he's calling a broken NHS.
The annual trade union meeting gets underway in Brighton as TUC members claim workers are being cheated out of holiday pay.
The countdown is on to Tuesday's television debate between former US President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. But it's not without controversy as Trump hits out at Harris's friendship with the TV's network boss.
And as the National Trust announces plans to make half its cafe items vegan, we're debating whether that's unfair to farmers or even a little bit hypocritical.
Flood warnings remain in place after a stormy night, with the Met Office saying that power cuts could be on the way.
Good morning. It's going to be a very wet day with some thunderstorms across central and southern parts of the UK. Find out all the weather details with me coming up in a little bit.
Good morning. A major announcement from the world of cricket as all-rounder Moeen Ali announces his retirement from the international game. We'll reflect on his contribution to England's fortunes over the years. We'll also pay tribute to the former Liverpool captain Ron Yeats, who's died at the age of 86.
just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Emma Webb, and this is GB News Breakfast.
So what are you going to go with name-wise?
I mean, I planned
just
to go
got
with my
married.
married name, but I've literally just come back from my honeymoon, so I can't get used to introducing myself as my new name.
Which is?
Trimble.
Trimble.
Emma Trimble, not Emma Webb, but I still keep saying Emma Webb anyway.
It sounds like a nightmare changing your name, even if you get married.
It's actually exceptionally complicated to go
That's what I
through all the
thought.
paperwork stuff, so I haven't done any of the legal paperwork stuff yet, so I don't know. Should we
What about
call myself-
inventing a new signature? It must be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, you just write it. What are you on about? Oh, you're so fancy.
Do you have to do a new one? I don't know if you do you? Maybe you do.
Trimble's different to Webb, isn't it?
Hadn't thought about that. Well, yeah, I guess I could
Yeah,
still
but,
use my own
because
old
you've got a
signature.
wedding certificate, that's it now.
Yeah,
if
that's
you want to
true.
change your name, that is it. It's all the only document you need.
Yeah, I'm going to need to go through all the legal paperwork and everything, and then I definitely will be Emma Trimble going forward. But I
Well,
guess
there you go.
I am spiritually already Emma Trimble.
Good. Well, that's what you need. From the minute you get married, you can change it.
Religious marriage, most important part.
Oh, there you
for
go.
me, anyway.
Quite right. Absolutely. Now, the King will today attend church near Balmoral for private prayer and reflection in remembrance of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, on the 2nd anniversary of her death.
King Charles and Queen Camilla are expected to appear at Crathy Kirk Church, where the late Queen worshipped. Royal reporter Cameron Walker reflects on that September day when the country lost one of its most beloved figures, and King Charles started his life as head of state.
Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old.
She was like a real inspiration.
She's been very diligent and honourable.
Sending thoughts and prayers to the family and hope, that the transition goes quite smoothly.
It's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne.
Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
Her eldest son became King Charles III, pledging himself to the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
His Majesty's time on the throne has seen celebration, state visits and health scares. The latest YouGov polling suggests 2/3 of the people believe Britain should continue to have a monarchy. Hardly any change since Charles became king, who himself has favourability ratings of 63%. A master of soft diplomacy, the King's overseas visits to France, Germany and Kenya were deemed big successes, cementing Great Britain's place on the world stage. The King was also the first British monarch to address the German Parliament, paying tribute to the deep historical bonds.
Today, it gives me particular pride to be with you once again, now as King, and to renew the special bond of friendship between our two countries.
Despite being 75 years old, the King has continued to throw himself into charity work alongside his constitutional duties. His Majesty launched the Coronation Food Project to support charities feeding disadvantaged Brits. Mindful of the extra money he's made from the Crown Estate's wind farm projects, His Majesty's asked that the profits be redirected to the wider public good.
King Charles is due to go to hospital for the treatment of an enlarged prostate.
The surgery was successful, but further tests diagnosed His Majesty with a separate form of cancer. He was forced to step back from public duties, something his nephew Peter Phillips said deeply frustrated him. The Queen suggested it was difficult to get him to rest, instead of overworking himself.
You haven't got too cold,
In April, a glimmer of hope emerged when His Majesty met members of the public on Easter Sunday at Windsor ahead of a phased return to public duties. His first engagement since his cancer diagnosis was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in London, becoming a new patron of Cancer Research UK. Doctors have now given the King the green light to travel to Australia and Samoa next month for an autumn tour, suggesting his health is stable. Yesterday, the King attended the annual Braemar gathering. Today, His Majesty is marking his accession day privately, in the place his reign began. Cameron Walker, GB News.
I I believe it's 2 years.
No, I can't.
It's remarkable.
I love seeing those photographs, though, of King Charles at the Highland Games.
Very good, yes.
Long may it continue.
Always gets the kilt on. A brave man.
I think it looks wonderful.
Brave man. Of course, there's a perennial question, isn't there, about kilts.
No sun gusts of wind.
No, let's hope not. Let's hope not. That's what the sporran's for, isn't it? Right, now, the Prime Minister says Britain's National Health Service has been broken by the Conservatives' 14 years in power.
A review due to be published this week will highlight how children are being let down with falling vaccination rates, increased ADHD diagnosis and a rise in eating disorders.
Let's talk to political commentator Andy Williams. Is this really the Conservatives' fault, or is it just down to the fact that the NHS infrastructures, management, however you want to phrase it, aren't working?
Well, I think it's at least in part down to the Conservatives, and I think Keir Starmer's well within his rights to point out that 14 years of Conservative government saw standards and performance in the NHS plummet on almost every measure. But clearly the organisation's not working well, and so Keir Starmer's talking about the need to do the hard yards of reform, and I think that's exactly what it is. So we need to be patient, because what we're not going to see is a huge overnight transformation of this huge, quite unwieldy organisation. I mean, you're looking at an organisation that employs 1.5 million people. I think it's the second biggest employer in the world, pretty much, or public sector employer, £178 billion of spending a year. So it's not an easy organisation to fix, and there is no quick fix. So I think it's about, there probably needs to be some sort of more of a private sector element in the NHS. There needs to be technological reform. It needs to be, smarter and more agile, and it's not just about pumping more money in.
But it really is this inefficient behemoth, isn't it? There was a great article from years ago, I think it was in The Guardian, and they had this line, it was to do with a report that had found that the NHS was, compared with other health outcomes in other countries, was succeeding on every measure except keeping people alive.
Right.
And, do you think that, given that this is a sort of huge institutional problem that has been across different governments, and we so often hear, the NHS is the envy of the world, when that probably really isn't the case when you look at health outcomes abroad, whether the Labour Party, even if they are willing and they have the political, the right political environment to make those reforms, that maybe they might be a bit short on ideas when it comes to reforming such an enormous, complicated system as the NHS, and thinking outside of the box when it comes to things like private sector involvement, which they're very tetchy about.
Well, I think the principle of everybody having equal access, free healthcare at the point of use, is a really important one, and I personally think that's something we should do everything we can to maintain. It's about how you make that happen and how you deliver it. I don't think Labour is short of ideas, actually. I think they get that just tinkering at the edges and pumping more money in is not going to cut it. There needs to be, I think technological reform and data is absolutely at the heart of this. There are so many ways that Britain can, if we're smart about it, kind of regain a world leadership position on healthcare.
Look, I think data, technology, fantastic.
Yeah.
I said every time they've tried to do anything to do with technology within the NHS and computer systems and all the rest of it and transferring data, it's failed every time.
But I don't think this isn't just about kind of reorganisations or about introducing expensive computer systems. It's about looking at, whether it's having personalised records for our healthcare. That's something that we should have easy access to, and that would, I think, make a big difference. If you look at things like genome sequencing, that's an area where Britain kind of has a world leadership position, and we should be looking to extend that. So there is some cause for optimism and opportunity, but where we are now, to come back to the point about the last government, I'm afraid they did do a terrible, terrible job. Waiting lists went through the roof, waiting times went through the roof. I mean, its outcomes are really bad at the moment.
You mentioned how big an employer the NHS is,
Yeah.
not just nationally, but worldwide. But in terms of, institutional willingness, you have so many people who are employed in bureaucratic management roles.
Yes.
Surely the government can't go the whole hog without having that bureaucracy on side. Is there a willingness in the NHS to reform even if that reform might not be in the personal interests of those who are in certain positions in roles of leadership?
Well, I think the vast majority of people who work in the NHS, you know, they're there because they care and because it's a vocation for them and they care about outcomes. And so I think if Labour can make the case that their reforms, whether it involves private sector involvement or otherwise, if they can make the case that those reforms are going to improve outcomes, I think people will largely get on board. Of course, you will always have people who are, you know, there will be ideologues who say we just need to keep doing the same thing. But that's proven that it's not going to work.
Well, in terms of that, maybe you need... I mean, it's very difficult, but do we need to look at actually restricting what the NHS is doing?
Well, maybe we do. And actually, if you look at how much certain things, preventable things, cost the NHS, smoking costs the NHS 2.6 billion a year, alcohol 3.5 billion a year, obesity 6.5 billion a year. You've got about 12 billion quid straight off the bat. Now, there are obviously questions about to what extent should we be limiting people's personal freedoms and all of that sort of thing. But there's a lifestyle aspect to this as well that I think we need to look at.
But then you have the problem of, saying, well, this isn't the NHS's job to deal with these things. But then is it the government's job to deal with those other things to do with people's health? Like you say, there is a whole debate around, the government's involvement in people's overall health and limiting their freedom to eat sugar, to smoke and so on. Surely that then veers in the direction of the argument that we need to live our lives for the sake of the NHS. It makes it even more of a shrine that we're trying to protect the NHS from our bad lifestyle.
I have heard that said, but I personally think the government has a role to sort of steer people towards doing things that are better for them. So, for example, if you look at the smoking ban, I'm largely the public places thing, not so much, but in terms of restricting people in the future from taking up smoking, I'm kind of in favour of that because actually it's not good for anyone, certainly not good for the individuals, and it's costing the NHS a ton of money. So I think there are interventions that we can look at. Now, if you're a hardcore libertarian, you're going to say we shouldn't touch it with a barge pole, but I do think that is part of the mix of reform. It's complicated, and I think Labour's being open-minded and is prepared to look at it from all angles.
How difficult is it going to get to be... I mean, I know that obviously there's a massive majority that the Labour Party has in the House, but nevertheless there's going to be a number of Labour Party MPs who won't be keen on really root and branch reform.
Yeah, there will be, but I think they should be ignored because, honestly, there is a small and very vocal minority on the left of the Labour Party who are always carping about these sorts of things. And actually, the benefit of Keir Starmer having a huge majority is that he can, I think, sideline them.
Just a quick one then. Should the NHS actually be taken out of the political spectrum altogether?
I think,
and be run cross-party?
I think in an ideal world it would be. I think it would be a really brilliant thing if it was elevated to a sort of where we had a cross-party commission that was looking at the political running of the NHS. I think that'd be great because the politicisation of it, I think, stifles proper reform, and actually there probably is among sensible people in Parliament a pretty strong consensus about what does and doesn't need to be done.
There you go, Andy. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. We're reforming the entire system this week.
It'd be easy.
Not going to be easy. No. Definitely not going to be easy.
I do think politicising things like the NHS is problematic. Really.
Well.
There you go, but it's not going to change. That isn't going to change. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but it's worth looking at.
Let's take a look now at some other stories coming up in the newsroom.
The former Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething has announced he will not stand for re-election. In July, he stepped down from the top job. After just 4 months, there was all the controversy around a £200,000 campaign donation given by a businessman convicted of environmental offences. Ellen Morgan has since taken over, so she is now the first woman to lead Wales.
A study into type 2 diabetes says that people who stay up late have a higher risk of developing the condition, which means the body doesn't produce enough insulin to regulate blood sugar levels. Researchers are warning that night owls might be more likely to smoke and have unhealthy diets, which contribute to the problem.
The Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates has married his long-term partner Suzanne in a ceremony officiated by Sir Richard Branson. Sir Richard Branson invited the couple to holiday on his private island in the Caribbean after the former sub-postmaster said in an interview, "If Richard is reading this, I'd love a holiday." This is a type 2 story. And it's worth knowing. It's worth knowing what actually can be a contributing factor for type 2 diabetes. However,
it's chicken and egg, isn't it?
Well, it is a little bit. And if you're a shift worker and you're on night shifts or late shifts or whatever it is, you can't turn that work down saying, well, I might be more at risk of being a type 2 diabetic later in life.
Yeah, and if you get home late at night, you've still got to eat your dinner, I guess, but you're on a kind of different clock. It's probably, I imagine it's got to have something to do with, I mean, I'm not a scientist, don't know, but something to do with your circadian rhythms, because it's quite difficult for night workers, isn't it? You go home when it's dark, you eat late, you go to bed late, you wake up late, and you're just sort of like out of sync with the way that your body is supposed to operate throughout the day.
Yeah, it's all stuff called dawn phenomenon and all this sort of stuff. It's all about your liver pumping out.
I don't think it's necessarily the case that night owls eat badly and smoke. I don't smoke. And I'm not necessarily the healthiest eater, but I am naturally a bit of a night owl. But obviously, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning today, I don't operate my life as a night owl, even if I am that way inclined. So I wonder how much of a choice it is, rather than just a natural inclination.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that one. Right, should we turn our attention to the other side of the pond? Because America's Republican nominee, President Trump, has held a rally in Wisconsin overnight in his first visit to the deep state since securing the official party nomination.
Trump mistakenly called Elon Musk Leon Musk before going off script to talk about the horror film Silence of the Lambs. That's ahead of Tuesday's television debate with the Democratic Party's candidate Kamala Harris, which will see the pair face off for the first time.
This debate will play very similar to the first time we saw John McCain, the former decorated hero and former U.S. Senator, debate Barack Obama. Many were watching that debate to see if Barack Obama could actually pass the commander-in-chief test, to be able to stand on the stage, particularly in the wake of 9/11, and look presidential, but more importantly, as someone who could stand next to and up to world leaders. And I think people are going to be watching on Tuesday to see if Kamala Harris can also pass that commander-in-chief test. And so this is going to be more about Kamala Harris and far less about Donald Trump.
Kamala hasn't been doing interviews as well. We've seen Donald Trump doing all sorts of podcasts, being very, very willing to talk to the public. And since ABC have imposed these certain rules, restrictions on the debate, Kamala Harris's team seemed to be concerned that this was going to rig things in favour of Donald Trump, things like having the microphones muted whilst the other person is speaking. But now Donald Trump has come out, hasn't he, and said that he thinks that it might have an impact on the way the debate plays out, that Kamala Harris has a long-term friendship with one of the bosses of Disney+.
Well, to be clear, these are the rules that were actually set in place by President Joe Biden. And what we're seeing here is Donald Trump's team basically wanted to keep these rules in place. One of the reasons why Kamala Harris wanted the microphones to not be muted is because she wanted to be able for the audience to actually be able to see Donald Trump possibly unhinged. And clearly that's not going to happen. And in addition to that, this will be hopefully not only an opportunity for people to see Kamala Harris in a very different light, but more importantly for both of these candidates to actually be able to share their vision with the country. Now, of course, we know Donald Trump is certainly no stranger to the histrionics when it comes to debating. But because Kamala Harris hasn't done this since 2020, many people simply don't know if she's up for or what we're actually going to see from her on Tuesday night.
What's going on with Leon Musk and the Silence of the Lambs as far as President Trump's concerned?
Well, look, even though Donald Trump sometimes get names wrong, what we do know is there is this great affinity between the two mercurial billionaires. Donald Trump has made clear that he would like to see Elon Musk serve in his administration if he is elected. And I think it's something that Elon Musk himself would actually like to do. And so I think clearly what we're seeing here is Donald Trump has an idea and a plan for how Elon Musk can actually work inside the government. We don't know what that will look like or how that will even work. And of course, we know both of these men have a history of falling out with a lot of people. So it's also, I think, very interesting to see, in fact, how long this bromance between these two individuals will actually last.
Well, Donald Trump actually did one of these interviews that I mentioned was with Elon Musk, and it was a very fascinating, candid interview. The two of them clearly got along very well with each other. But this goes back to what I said earlier, which is that Donald Trump has been very open, very candid, not just talking about the assassination attempt, but also about what he stands for, whereas Kamala Harris does seem to be reluctant to engage with the public in quite as open a way. Do you think that the fact that in this debate, one of the rules is that they're not allowed to have pre-written notes and are not allowed to communicate with their teams during the ad breaks, that actually Donald Trump is far more prepared for public scrutiny than Kamala Harris is, given that she seems so reluctant to actually be exposed to that kind of scrutiny?
No, not at all. In fact, typically in these types of settings, in these types of face-offs between presidential candidates, there is no opportunity for them to engage with their staffs or bring notes into these debates. And that's typically something that we have seen negotiated even when the Commission on Presidential Debates was actually running these events. And so I think that's par for the course. We do know that Kamala Harris has been hunkered down in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she is doing debate prep. And we know that these two candidates have very different ways of actually preparing for these debates. And so I think we know that Donald Trump certainly is no stranger and has been engaging.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to watch. Well, I was going to say I'm looking forward to that. I shall only be finding out what's happened after the event because I'll be away on holiday.
I might stay up late to watch it.
Yeah, so
I imagine it's going to be like 3 o'clock in the morning here, isn't it, probably?
Yeah,
the last one was.
Yeah, it will be.
I'm very excited for it. I'm considering staying up to
Yeah,
watch it.
well, if you're interested in that sort of thing, that's a good thing to do, I think.
I was never interested in US politics before, but this year I find it exciting. There's an awful lot of drama going on.
Yeah, there is.
It's very entertaining, that's
Yeah, no, I will not be staying up for that one, but I will be reading the stuff the day after to find out what's
everything that
going
happens
on.
over the pond affects us here, so
It does.
Definitely an important election for us as well.
America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, is what they say. Right, let's see what the weather's going to do for you. It's been a bit of a grim start for a lot of us. Craig's got the details.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
All right, it's time for the Great British Giveaway and our biggest cash prize that we have ever given away.
Now, I couldn't believe this the first time that I read it, but really, £36,000 could be yours, and that would be like having an extra £3,000 tax-free in your bank account each month for the entire year.
Ooh, very nice indeed. If you want at least the chance to make that yours, here's how.
This is your chance to...
Off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Labour government wants to introduce a legal right not to be bothered so that staff can ignore bosses' emails and texts and calls outside of normal office hours, including holidays. It's all part of Labour's election pledge to give everybody a right to switch off for the first time ever. Mutaz, do you ever turn your phone off?
I don't. If you want to work in a high-functioning job that pays well in the end, you have to keep your phone off. The workplace is competitive. If you work longer hours, you're more likely to get a promotion.
It depends what job you do. We work in news, the three of us. News goes on all the time. It would be ridiculous to think that we could ever leave our emails or a phone call alone, because we don't know what's about to happen next. But say you're working a clerical job or a manual job, if it's absolutely 9 to 5 and your job is over by then, there's no reason why you should be contacted by your boss except in an emergency.
Is that because people nowadays, they want to, they don't want to live to work, they want to work to live?
People are more relaxed about work. I'm able to come in here dressed like this. But when it comes to legislation, you've got to be careful because it leads to ridiculous situations. The Euros, when England was playing Spain, one of the Spanish footballers was 17 years old. I think the Spanish FA had to pay a fine because in Germany, a 17-year-old shouldn't work after 8 p.m. or something like that.
Because with me now is the head of employment at Pickering Solicitors, Joanna Robson. Joanna, thanks for joining us. Is it a generational issue?
Yes, I think there is a generational issue. I think younger people, they generally want to make a really good impression. So sometimes you find the younger workforce are the ones that actually want to really put their mark out there and they really want to work longer hours. And that's going to, it's going to be difficult for younger people to, switch off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, it is 2 years to the day since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, sending the country into mourning and, bizarrely, shock, even though, of course, we knew it was coming. But nevertheless, it seemed incredible that it happened, and it brought to an end a 70-year reign.
I personally didn't think it was possible that she could ever die. I was quite shocked by it. But now it is also King Charles's accession day, the anniversary of that. So now to reflect on both of their reigns, we're joined by the editor of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward, who is in Oxfordshire, and royal historian based in Bath, Martin Whittock. Good morning to you both. So,
good morning.
Martin, how important is it for us to be, looking back on Her Majesty's legacy and reflecting? I think many people will be thinking about where they were when they heard that news.
I think a number of things stand out from her extraordinary reign. The first is service. It was the hallmark of her reign, and I think it raises questions about what it means to hold public office. We've seen a lot of turbulence in the last 2 years, and I think the Queen's reign really underscores those in office, those in power are there to serve. And she exemplified that in a most extraordinary way. The second thing is discretion. I've heard it said that meetings with the Queen were the only one that senior politicians could go into and know it wouldn't be leaked anywhere. And I think that sense of discretion is really important. And that's something into which Charles has grown. People sometimes wondered how he would cope being quite an outspoken Prince of Wales, but he has grown into that role, and I think into a template set by his mother. Thirdly, I think the value of a hereditary, non-political head of state in our constitution is underscored by her reign. We've seen the kind of turbulence that happens around the world when heads of state are so deeply polarized and polarizing. And I think for me personally, it really has underscored the value of the hereditary head of state in the UK. And finally, very important to myself as an Anglican lay minister in the Church of England, is her quiet, strong Christian faith. It underpinned her and what she did and her reign, but she accompanied it with deep respect for all of all faiths and none. Those are the things that really stand out for me from the extraordinary reign from this extraordinary Queen.
We do learn from our parents, Ingrid, don't we? And it has to be said, of all those key points, which I think Martin outlined brilliantly, actually, the King does seem to follow on all of those points. I think despite a difficult couple of years because of health issues, he's done remarkably well.
I certainly agree with Martin. I think everyone would. And I would have said, instead of service, I would have said duty, which is really the same thing. And I think this is what King Charles has taken from his late mother, this sense of duty above all else. So, for instance, when Charles discovered that he was suffering from cancer, he was determined it wasn't going to stop him. It might have slowed him right down, but it wasn't going to stop him because he still had to continue to do his duty as king. And he did come into a great many difficulties when he ascended the throne, mainly because of his own family. And basically, although Prince Harry hadn't published his book, Spare, at the time, the king knew it was looming. There was still the problem with the Duke of York. There was all kinds of things going on. There was the new series of The Crown was coming out. There was a whole lot of what you call sort of riffraff going on when King Charles ascended the throne. So he just sort of seemed to take it with both hands, and he sort of burst, I feel, upon his role, because suddenly he was there shaking hands, allowing people to hug them and hugging them back. It was very, very different from his mother, and he really embraced it.
And Martin, we are all of us, in some deep fundamental sense, Elizabethans. But Charles is, of course, a monarch going into a very different age to when the Queen ascended to the throne. So, in terms of the importance of the monarchy constitutionally, you said you're, a lay minister in the Church of England, and we're seeing changes, constitutional changes from the Labour Party with respect to the hereditary principle in the House of Lords. How important is the monarchy within our constitutional ecosystem with respect to also the established church?
I think it's very important in two ways. First of all, it is an anchor of stability. If we think about, we're talking about a monarchy here, over a millennium old, that can trace its roots right back to Alfred the Great and beyond that, for all the changes in royal families and dynasties in that time. And I think that's important to remember, that there have been huge, monumental, seismic changes, in the last 1,000 years, obviously. And yet the monarchy is an anchor within that. And I think that is the first thing. I think there is a principle here that the monarchy gives one, if you like, an anchor at times of storms, a sense of continuity, a sense of history, a sense of connectivity with our past that helps us make sense of our present. And I think that's That's really important. But I also think the monarch's role as Supreme Governor of the head of the Church of England is important. But I think what Charles brings to that is this concept that, as well as having that role, and he clearly has deep respect for that role, he also sees deep respect and exemplifies deep respect for spirituality and the spiritual in our material world as well. And so, as a member of the Church of England, I am very pleased to have the monarch as the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, but I'm also equally pleased that that monarch sees himself, as herself in the past, as the monarch of all people, of all faiths and none. And I think that's something that Charles brings to the table and will emphasize at the table this sense that we are more than just a physical, we are spiritual, creative, complicated people. I think he understands that. His mother did too. He's been very open about this. And I think that's part of that stability at times of turbulence and change. And the monarchy still exemplifies that under Charles.
OK, there we have to leave it as we enter our Carolean age. Good to see you both this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, still to come, Aidan McGee will be here with all of the latest sports news. That's up next.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This Bank Holiday Monday, we'll be celebrating National Dog Day by uncovering how many pet owners would rather spend the bank holiday with their pet over their partner. In fact, new research has uncovered the 5 key personas that make up Generation Pet. That's a new wave of post-pandemic pet owners, with 58% saying they worry about their pet being diagnosed with a serious illness. Well, joining us now to tell us more about how we should be caring for our pampered pooches is Dr. Edwina Gildia.
Some of the interesting facts coming through that is that 80% of us think that pet as part of the family. The new pet owners who have come on board during the pandemic, there's a lot to learn with being a new pet owner. Interesting facts, as you mentioned, 1/3 of pet owners are preferring to spend time with their pet this weekend over their partner. 60% of pet owners, and dog specifically calling them out, say that their dog improves their mental health, and 55% noting that improves their physical health by getting out and about.
It's also about showing that love and appreciation for these animals which don't ask anything of us but love.
That was another point that came through this research that we did at Zoetis UK, is that they bring a purpose to life. And I think that's another thing to call out. It's so important for ourselves, for society to have that purpose. But with that comes responsibility. And that's ensuring that we do support their health, and we know how to do that as well.
If you'd rather spend your bank holiday with your dog than your partner, maybe we've got too much of an over-reliance on our pets?
I think it depends on what way you look at it. For some people, it may be a connection. I think it's a positive thing that we have, and we should celebrate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Aidan's got the sport. Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I want to focus on a colossus within the English game, actually, although he was Scottish originally, coming down from Aberdeen to play for Liverpool. I want to take you back to the 60s. Liverpool was not the club that we know now. It was actually quite a parochial side. It was a side that was playing in the second division. Bill Shankly was the manager. Ronnie Yates was a key signing. He died yesterday at the age of 86, having suffered from Alzheimer's for quite some time, but he was one of the building blocks in that team that came out of the second division and became one of the greatest clubs in Europe. So it's right that we celebrate his life. He was working as a chief scout at Liverpool as recently as 2006. And he was indeed, yeah. He won 2 league titles, FA Cup and the Charity Shield. And then, obviously, Shankly gave way to Bob Paisley, Joe Fagan, Kenny Dalglish and so forth. So that was announced yesterday that he had died sadly at the age of 86.
Oh, bless him.
And what about this story here of Moeen Ali retiring?
Yeah, 37 years old. I know, but it's a demanding game.
Is that young or old?
It's for retirement. I would say it's probably about average. I mean, it's getting older in sport in general now because sports science is allowing them to just carry on a little bit longer, and it will probably get higher and higher as well, which is a good thing, I feel.
I'd retire if I could get to 37 and retire.
Yeah, only a couple of years to wait. But no, look, he's retiring from the England scene. I mean, look, he's won the 50-over World Cup in 2019. 3 years later, he won the T20 World Cup. Nobody has taken more Test wickets and scored more runs than he has overall. So that's an outstanding knock, as we'd say in cricket, for him. He's not been selected for the White Ball Series for the upcoming Australia tour, so I think that's probably informed his decision. And he's been axed along with Johnny Bairstow, Chris Wokes, and Chris Jordan by the two new by the coach and the captains. I think that's kind of made him realise that it's time to go. In fact, his quote pretty much backed that up as well. He said, "I've played a lot of cricket for England. I just felt that the time was right. I've done my part." And I think sometimes it's just realisation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's quite... You go out at the top.
Yeah, and then you look back and you think, well, what have I contributed? What can I contribute going forward? Are you going to be one of these players who drifts down the leagues and drifts down the levels? And, sometimes the last memory you have of somebody is the one that lasts the longest, and you don't want it to be a bad one. You want someone to remember you at the very, very top.
Yeah, is he likely to stay around on the scene, though?
Yes, I think he will. He'll carry on at club level. Yeah, this is very much an England decision. But, I mean, he made his debut in 2014. So he's had... No one can say...
10 years.
Good innings, as
very good, yes. Loving it, Hayden. I'd throw you out if we didn't have to talk about the Paralympics.
Yeah, I know.
Of course we do, because it's the last day today.
It is indeed, but another brilliant outcome yesterday. 20 medals in total.
Fantastic.
Five golds. I'll just take you through some of the standout performances yesterday. Hannah Cockcroft winning gold, her 9th Paralympic title on the 800 metres on the track. In the canoeing as well, the para-canoeing, Emma Wiggs and Charlotte Henshaw both winning gold. And in the pool where we've been absolutely outstanding, Stephen Clegg 100-metre butterfly final, he won there as well. So look at the table there, 47 golds, 120 in total. As we've said many times, China at an advantage because they enter more athletes. So pound for pound, I think England have more than done their bit in this table. And they're not. I mean, look, there's 18 medals today. And I suppose you're going to say to me, well, you can get 20 in a day. But I don't think the United States... certainly
18 more than the States, though?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's possible, I suppose, to overcome that today, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Britain are safely in third. And look at the top three as opposed to what Netherlands got, 56.
Yeah, well, let's hope that we don't get overtaken.
But every day we reflected on brilliant performances.
Oh, stunning.
Netherlands is a little country, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. They've invented fewer athletes, but they've all done well.
Done brilliantly well. Aidan, thank you very much indeed. Don't go anywhere. We've got the papers heading your way in just a moment.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
It's a very difficult issue, this, right? As far as we know, the boxer with male chromosomes was born with female genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. Sex in humans is binary and immutable because we are mammals. And there is a minority of people who have disorders of sexual development, and that can affect a person's reproductive organs. But these people are male or female. And yesterday, what we witnessed was basically just glorified male violence against women and girls. The difference is, I mean, that happens every day all over the world. And the difference is that in every other circumstance, we consider beating up women to be wrong, but it was deemed acceptable by those at the IOC because they're claiming that it's sport, but it's not. It's violence and it's wrong.
Peter, Lottie's right, isn't she, that we've been talking a lot recently about violence against women and girls, and regardless of whether this person is intersex or transgender, they have male chromosomes. That means they have a very, very distinct biological advantage that could actually be fatal to a female athlete competing against them.
Well, of course, sport does need to be fair, and we do need to examine this case very thoroughly. There are reports that the boxer, Iman Khalif, was born a biological woman. She is not transgender. She is not non-binary. She is not intersex. She may have elevated levels of testosterone, but that's entirely natural. It's beyond her control. It's the way she was born. And that is why the International Olympic Committee has said that she falls within the rules.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, time for the papers. Just a quick skim through, unfortunately. A bit tight for time with Suzanne Evans and Andy Jones. But we'll do what we can. Andy, in the Sunday Times, Great Ormond Street. This is a really shocking story.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an investigation into a rogue surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital. This surgeon operated on as many as 720 children. This is a surgeon there who was working specifically on leg lengthening or leg restructuring procedures, children born with, I don't know, congenital defects or weren't growing in sort of evenly. They talked about one instance where they would deliberately break children's legs as part of this and then extend their legs using sort of a brace and rack system. And this was mismanaged particularly by this individual doctor. And one child, at least one child, the Sunday Times says, eventually had their leg amputated. One victim was just 4 months old. And again, within this story, this is an international doctor. Within this story, there's stories of an NHS staff knew that was something going on. NHS staff said, look, I wouldn't want him treating on my family or working on anybody that I knew. They were telling other non-members of staff, don't use this doctor. And of course, inevitably, this surgeon is laid off, a surgeon by the name of Jabbar. And he was given a sabbatical on full pay for 11 months.
I mean, it went
but clearly
on for...
something hideous went wrong here.
Yeah, for 7 years. That's what gets me, for 7 years. So the paper quotes the father of a 6-year-old who said, I raised my concerns, but they just brushed it under the carpet. Now, clearly this surgeon was doing very complex operations, but the report says it was avoidable.
Yeah.
721
You would
children.
think after
shocking.
one victim would be enough,
Yeah.
but to have, one, two, and then for it to continue.
And Great Ormond Street, the worldwide renowned children's hospital.
Yeah, there were with nature of this surgery, the children were left with these leg braces on, and the parents were saying, "Look, my child's leg is growing at a peculiar angle, or this doesn't look right. You can see the leg is bent. This looks strange." And it was sort of, he knows what he's doing.
Oh,
move on.
Dear, no. Suzanne, Sunday Telegraph. Carol Vorderman. She's got the devil in her.
So that's the front page, yes, on the Sunday Times magazine. So Carol Vorderman, what a transformation. She's gone from being like the brainy girl next door on Countdown, hasn't she, to becoming a political vamp. She clearly at one point in her life embraced the phrase, well-behaved women don't make history, and decided she was going to change her image. But she's obviously been getting it out for the Conservatives and Reform for a very long time now. She credits herself in this article quite standardly staggeringly as having helped bring down the government.
Oh, does
I think that's a little bit off to be fine, but it's basically a piece for her book. She's written a book called Now What, in which she's got a 10-point plan for government, which includes renationalisation, genuine levelling up for the North, reform of the House of Lords, and a ban on old Etonians in the cabinet.
Goodness me, why doesn't she just run
very
for
Labour?
office?
Well, maybe she should. Exactly. I suppose she's got 18 million in the bank, according to this article.
Oh, has she?
I don't know. We'll see if she's one of those ones leaving the country that we talked about earlier when Labour launched their tax raid. But,
well, it's interesting.
She's a Marmite character, that's for sure now.
She's not backwards in coming forwards, isn't
No,
Carol?
everybody loved her, but now she's very Marmite.
Yeah. Andy, let's touch on this story that in the Telegraph that the BBC has breached rules 1,500 times over the Gaza war.
This is a study been carried out by a group of solicitors who I'm not saying are particularly unbiased in this by any means, but the report reveals a deeply worrying pattern of bias against Israel. And they cite 1,500 breaches of independent reporting. This is a mixture of study by human beings and AI. Right. And they say that there's a particular bias about the reporting of Gaza. Obviously, we've had instances where Jeremy Bowen's had to correct his reporting about how our hospital was blown up and who it was blown up by. And then Jeremy Bowen obviously said, oh, well, I don't actually regret it because Israel are doing lots of bad things. But anybody, I speak to a lot of people who worked at the BBC, a lot of people from Jewish backgrounds, and they feel increasingly uncomfortable there. BBC banned them from going to different protests about Israel as well. And it does feel that BBC aren't necessarily able to keep the bias of their reporters out of it.
Yeah, basically the report concludes that, Israel was linked with genocide 14 times more than Hamas. Given that, of course, Hamas did the genocide on the 7th of October that kicked all this off. Absolutely damning report.
Yeah, well, OK. Thank you both very much indeed. See you a little bit later on. Here's the weather with Craig.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible £36,000 to be won in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having an extra £3,000 each month to play with. And because it's totally tax-free, you get to keep every penny and spend it however you like. We could be paying for your entire year until 2025. How amazing would that be? For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning to you. 2 years today since Queen Elizabeth II passed away.
As the nation pays tribute to Britain's longest reigning monarch and King Charles prepares to make his accession day.
Well, a new memorial, of course, has been announced by the government. It'll stand in St James's Park to honour the 70-year rule of our late Queen.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer plays the blame game as he claims the Conservatives are responsible for what he's calling a broken NHS.
The annual trade union meeting gets underway in Brighton as TUC members claim workers are being cheated out of holiday pay.
The countdown begins on Tuesday's television debate between former US President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. But it's not without controversy as Trump hits out at Harris's friendship with the TV network's boss.
The National Trust announces plans to make half of its cafe items vegan. So we're debating this morning whether that's unfair to farmers or even perhaps a little bit hypocritical.
And as one man is about to become the first person to visit every parish in England, we find out what's motivated his grand travels.
Flood warnings remain in place after a stormy night. The Met Office saying power cuts could be on the way.
Good morning. It's going to be a very wet day with some thunderstorms across central and southern parts of the UK. Find out all the weather details with me coming up in a little bit.
England got off to a flyer in the Nations League with victory over the Republic of Ireland in Dublin. New interim manager Lee Carsley kept his pledge not to sing the national anthem, and now legendary football boss Harry Redknapp has weighed in on the debate. More later.
Just gone 8 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Emma Trimble, and this is GB News Breakfast.
Excellent. I'm glad you did that.
I nailed it that time, didn't I?
Nailed it.
I've overcome my identity crisis. I know who I am now.
Good.
I'm not saying the wrong name.
Oh, you see, it's wrong on the strap now. But we can update that. That's
They're just trying to confuse me.
Yeah. Emma Trimble, it's nice. Mrs. Trimble.
Mrs. Trimble. I sound like a character from Beatrix Potter. I love it.
Oh, you do a little bit, yeah. No,
You weren't tempted to do the double barrel thing, no?
I don't think Trimble and Webb go very well together.
You don't think so?
No. And Trimble's a nicer name than Webb.
Trimble and Webb, that sounds like a jeweller's.
Trimble Webb.
It does, or a solicitor.
Yeah,
it's definitely too upbeat to be an Undertaker's, which is nice.
Yeah. No, I like it when married couples have the same name.
Yeah, I'm not into the double barrelling business.
No, I'm not.
It's very ubiquitous now, isn't it? Everyone's had it.
Didn't even have to think about it. Definitely taking his name. No questions asked.
Good.
Good for you.
Good. I think. Or he could have taken yours, either which way.
No, I would have been very against
Congratulations.
Would you?
No, I'm very traditional.
Oh, you
Thank
see. You see, I quite sometimes when he's got a horrible name, I do sort of think, why doesn't it just work the other way?
See, I'm very lucky.
You are lucky.
Very
with that
lucky.
one.
Trimble's a nice name. Very happy to sell it.
Flip around there, can't
You can, yeah, legally, you can do whatever you want with it, yeah. So there you go. You could have legally swapped names.
That would have been a bit weird, wouldn't it?
So he could have been
That would have
Webb.
really been confusing.
That would have been confusing. I mean, why you'd want to do that, I don't know, but it's a possibility.
Does anybody do
Legally
that?
it.
Probably not. Surely not.
If you have done that, gbnews.com/you'll
Yeah, do let us know.
Just let us know why. Anyway, right, let's crack on, should we? Because it's the 8th of September today. It's an anniversary, which most of us, well, it's funny how these things fall, isn't it? And would you believe it's 2 years since the Queen died? I find it very hard to get my head around that all that time has passed already. The King is going to attend church near Balmoral. He'll be having private prayer and reflection in remembrance of his mother.
And King Charles and Queen Camilla are accepted to appear at Crathy Kirk, where the late Queen worshipped. Royal reporter Cameron Walker reflects on that September day when the country lost one of its most beloved figures and King Charles started his life as head of state.
Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old.
She was like a real inspiration.
She's been very diligent and honourable.
Sending thoughts and prayers to the family and hope, that the transition goes quite smoothly.
It's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne.
Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
Her eldest son became King Charles III, pledging himself to the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
His Majesty's time on the throne has seen celebration, state visits and health scares. The latest YouGov polling suggests 2/3 of the people believe Britain should continue to have a monarchy. Hardly any change since Charles became king, who himself has favourability ratings of 63%. A master of soft diplomacy, the King's overseas visits to France, Germany and Kenya were deemed big successes, cementing Great Britain's place on the world stage. The King was also the first British monarch to address the German Parliament, paying tribute to the deep historical bonds.
Today, it gives me particular pride to be with you once again, now as King, and to renew the special bond of friendship between our two countries.
Despite being 75 years old, the King has continued to throw himself into charity work alongside his constitutional duties. His Majesty launched the Coronation Food Project to support charities feeding disadvantaged Brits. Mindful of the extra money he's made from the Crown Estate's wind farm projects, His Majesty's asked that the profits be redirected to the wider public good.
King Charles is due to go to hospital for the treatment of an enlarged prostate.
The surgery was successful, but further tests diagnosed His Majesty with a separate form of cancer. He was forced to step back from public duties, something his nephew Peter Phillips said deeply frustrated him. The Queen suggested it was difficult to get him to rest instead of overworking himself.
You haven't got too cold.
In April, a glimmer of hope emerged when His Majesty met members of the public on Easter Sunday at Windsor ahead of a phased return to public duties. His first engagement since his cancer diagnosis was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in London, becoming a new patron of Cancer Research UK. Doctors have now given the King the green light to travel to Australia and Samoa next month for an autumn tour, suggesting his health is stable. Yesterday, the King attended the annual Braemar gathering. Today, His Majesty is marking his accession day privately, in the place his reign began. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Now, the Prime Minister says Britain's National Health Service has been broken by the Conservatives' 14 years in power.
A review due to be published this week will highlight how children are being let down by falling vaccination rates and increasing ADHD diagnosis.
But is Labour just laying the groundwork to blame the opposition for all of the failings for the NHS? Is it time the Health Secretary Wes Streeting steps up and takes some responsibility?
Well, now joining us is the former Chief of Staff to Nadhim Zahawi, James Price. So, James, do you think that the Labour Party actually stand a better chance of reforming the NHS given that they don't have the political baggage that the Conservatives did?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me on to talk about this. It's obviously very important. Everybody watching this will have had some kind of interaction with the National Health Service, and the chances are, unfortunately, it probably won't have been a very good one very often. It's a service that's been struggling a lot, and I know that's heresy for me to even say that on live national television. But, you know, for every wonderful interaction that we may have with it, everybody else will know of somebody or will experience themselves something bad. Now, that is not because the doctors and nurses or even the administrators, certainly not the cleaners, not because they're not wonderful people. Some of them will be not so wonderful, but by and large, wonderful people working hard, doing, you know, important work that is, by the way, done obviously in every other country on earth as well. The problem is the root cause, the system itself. The system doesn't work very well, and just throwing more and more and more money into it is not going to fix it. Labour have found that out, the Conservatives have found that out. But as you say, Labour maybe doesn't have so much political baggage purely because they've just spent the last 14 years saying the Tories are trying to privatise it or something like that. Actually, you know, they've been saying that since it founded. They've been saying that ever since the NHS came along. But if they've been trying to privatise it, they've not done a very good job of it. And these are the same people who try and look to Europe, they try and look to the rest of the continent to say, well, why don't we do it better there? You know, the Germans do everything better, the French do this better, and yet they never do that when it comes to the healthcare service. And yet continental healthcare services and plenty of other advanced healthcare services around the world don't have the same massive problems that we do. Why is that? It's the system.
OK, fair enough. But they're right then, aren't they, to blame the Conservatives for this? Because, as you say, the Tories have thrown loads of money into it, hasn't worked. We can look elsewhere at systems that work better. And the Tories had 14 years to at least put something in place, and they didn't.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives should take some blame for not being able to make these kind of big reforms. Of course, it takes a lot of political will to do this. It is a sacred cow that we can't touch. I think it was one of Margaret Thatcher's chancellors, Nigel Lawson, who said that the NHS was the closest thing we now have to a national religion. But of course, under the long era of Blair and Brown, they didn't fix it either. And yet they saw the same kinds of horrible things. You know, everybody remember mid-staffs and the kind of horrors that you were seeing there. Patients forced to drink the water out of flower vases because the service quality was so low there. I think this is a problem that has been plaguing Britain because of the inability or unwillingness of both parties to do anything about it. It should be said that Wes Streeting, the health secretary you mentioned at the top of this, has, in opposition and now maybe a little bit in government, made some positive, encouraging noises about the scale of reform that's needed. But since Labour seem to be more focused on doing tiny damaging reforms to our constitution or to taking pensioners' winter fuel allowance away, I'm not exactly sure they're going to have the stomach for this kind of big fight. You know, it used to be said that only Nixon could go to China and only Labour now can go and do this with the NHS. I don't think they've got the bottle for it because those kind of reforms that are needed are going to kick up an almighty stink. And I think that Labour have already found their fingers burned by trying to do much smaller reforms than this. So I fear that it's just going to get worse before it gets any better.
But James, the Conservatives have just been throwing more and more money into the black hole. But actually all along, throughout all of those years and successive governments, it has been the Labour Party who have been egging that on by saying that the problem is that the NHS needs more money. So they've been putting more and more money into an inefficient system rather than reforming it. But what do you think should be done with the NHS? Do you think that the Labour Party have the right ideas when it comes to reforming the system?
Probably not is the short answer on it. You're right. Again, chasing the money is the problem. I think the first thing, we have to all be much more comfortable and confident in saying that there are many flaws in this system and that is not to attack and denigrate nurses and all the rest of it. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, has to be this, as you say, this kind of endless black hole. If you look at the increase in NHS funding, if nothing happens, it will just take up a greater and greater and greater proportion of the amount of money that government spends every year until we end up, if Russia is a gas field with a country attached to it, that will just be a healthcare service with a country attached to it. And that's a problem. If you go and look at what you have on the continent, you have a lot of people, they don't have to pay for healthcare in the way that maybe we think about America having to do this. You can't get treatment unless you've got the money. But they do have an insurance-based system. that says that you buy your health insurance, and if you can't, then the state will do it for you. And that inclusion of more private provision leads to better outcomes. We know that the profit mechanism works in all other aspects of life. Why wouldn't it do it here? And now a few people will hear me say that and go, oh, you want to privatize it and sell it off and all this kind of stuff. Well, no, I think the American system is probably the only healthcare system in the developed world that's more dysfunctional than ours. But I don't think anybody can seriously look at the system we've got now. It's the number one user of pagers still in the world, the number one user of fax machines in the world. And we have the worse avoidable health and death outcomes than the Czech Republic, and I think worse cancer survival rates than Slovakia. Now, they're lovely places, but we should be aiming a little bit higher than that. So I think that the kind of radical reforms to bring in more competition and to bring in more productivity as well, rather than just throwing money at it. Because at the end of the day, if we do that, we'll see more people survive and get better health outcomes, which is what we all want.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's slightly problematic though, isn't it, when you say, anything with a profit margin performs better. I mean, you can see the economic sense for that, and private business will play things more strategically. The problem you've got is we're in a situation now where the rail network's going to be nationalised, and lots of people agree with that because it's falling apart. There's lots of calls now for water to be nationalised because the system is falling apart. So there's got to be a reluctance to say, well, let's start privatising the NHS, because actually the track record of privatisation in this country at the moment isn't looking that great.
I think I would disagree with that. I mean, first of all, I don't think we need to worry about this happening anytime soon, and I don't think a full-scale privatisation is quite what I'm calling for. Again, look at the continental models where people they have health insurance that's paid for by the state if they can't provide it themselves. But on other kind of privatizations, the country was in such a complete and utter mess before the Thatcher revolution came along, and people at home will remember, and maybe some of them are lucky enough not to remember, just how awful it was. 3-day working weeks and bodies going unburied and litter not being picked up and roving power cuts and things like that. And a huge part of that was due to the inefficiency of the state-run services. And the wave of privatizations is still having to do work to catch up on modernization that should have been done a long time beforehand. And you talk about trains, well, actually, the worst bit is Network Rail. That's actually most of what happens, and that's been nationalized anyway. Whatever system we need, there needs to be a big push to increase the productivity. You can't just keep throwing more money at it, as we've said, making things more productive and a better service. Now, I tend to find that if you could make people get some money for themselves by doing that, that's a better spur, a better incentive for them to go and improve these kinds of services, because that's, to me, the best way to actually affect that change. If everybody were to do it anyway, we wouldn't be having this problem, and then it just would be wonderful, the trains would be wonderful, but they're not. And as it stands, I think the last thing I'd say on it is that government is now so enormous. It's trying to do so many things. I mean, for goodness sake, in the last week, the Prime Minister is talking about Oasis, the band, and the ticket resales, rather than dealing with big fundamental problems like the NHS. If the government tried to do a lot less, it could focus on doing the things that it does do, and healthcare, I think, should be one of those things, a lot better.
Smaller government. There you go. James Price, thanks very much indeed. Well, if that's not a Tory mantra, I don't know what is. David's been in touch, says the NHS needs complete reform, needs to go back to its original idea of basic medical care. Everything else should be paid for.
What is very clear is that it's not sustainable for it to continue the way it is, because people are having a really, really bad experience of it. And it's almost as if we've got a universal lack of healthcare.
But what is also very clear, and actually from that conversation particularly, is that how difficult it is going to be to actually change something that large.
Well, and that is what happens, isn't it, when you let an institution become such a complex behemoth, and there's such incentive, those in the institution, to keep it running the way that it is. It does become increasingly difficult to unpick it, and people have been calling for reform for such a long time. And it's just been swept under the carpet because, it's now got to a point where we have to do something about it. But for so long, it really was such a sacred cow that we just simply couldn't touch it.
We're going to have to break a lot of eggs, I think, one way or another, hopefully.
Not make an omelette.
Well, not make an omelette, no. All right, 17 minutes past 8. Let's have a look at some of the other stories heading into the newsroom this morning.
Former Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething has announced that he will not stand for re-election in 2026. In July, he stepped down from the top job after just 4 months following controversy around a £200,000 campaign donation given by a businessman convicted of environmental offences. Eluned Morgan has since taken over, becoming the first woman to lead Wales.
Study into type 2 diabetes says people who stay up late have a higher risk of developing the condition, which means you don't produce enough insulin to regulate your glucose levels. Researchers are warning that night owls are more at risk. They're more likely to smoke and have unhealthy diets, apparently, which contribute to the problem.
Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates has married his long-term partner Suzanne in a ceremony officiated by none other than business tycoon Richard Branson. Sir Richard reportedly invited the couple on holiday to his private island in the Caribbean after the former sub-postmaster said in an interview, "If Richard Branson is reading this, I'd love a holiday."
Now, the weather's been horrific so far this morning across a lot of the country, and a yellow weather warning is still in place in several regions across the UK. Came into force last night.
Experts are warning it's not over yet, though, with more thunder and lightning apparently on the way.
Let's talk to weather journalist Nathan Rao, who's in East London this morning. Hi, Nathan. Look, it was horrific overnight. What are we going to see today, and what's causing this?
Yeah, you would have woken up to some snap, crackle and bangs this morning in parts of the country. In fact, there were around 1,260 lightning strikes this morning already. And the outlook for the rest of the day is not much better, certainly in the south of the country. Now, if you take the Midlands, the East Midlands downwards, that's really all of England, South England. There is a weather warning from the Met Office in force today, and that is for up to 4 inches of rain in parts. Some more thunderstorms in parts, and for pretty much a miserable, wet and grim day everywhere within that region. And this is due to, it's the jet stream again, Stephen. As you know, we're always talking about the jet stream. The jet stream is once again going to be our nemesis. But what's happened is it's split, and it's left a little spinning circle of low pressure to the southwest of the UK. And over the weekend, that's brought in some warmer air. You may have felt it was a bit humid and a bit warm over the weekend, but it's also brought these thunderstorms up from the continent and this very unstable plume of air and the rain that we're going to see through today. So for the rest of today, certainly in the south of the country, the middle of the country, it's going to be wet. There are some Environment Agency flood alerts in place as well. So the usual warnings from the Met Office are to have a look at the forecast before you head out. Be prepared for power cuts, travel restrictions, travel problems on the roads, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, as we go into the start of next week, it is more unsettled weather, and then it is going to turn colder.
Oh, joy.
What fun.
Joy.
Autumn's here.
I always like to bring you some joyous news with the weather, you know that.
You never do. You never do. Nathan, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Oh.
Well, it's all fun and games and exciting when it's thundering and lightning outside like last night, but it's not very much fun if you get flooded.
No,
is it?
no.
Or have a power cut.
Jet stream, though, Nathan always talks about the jet stream. It's always that blooming jet stream.
Don't understand it.
It's all very common. It's why you need to be a weather expert like Nathan to understand.
Weather's extremely complicated. All I know is that I do enjoy a thunderstorm.
A thunderstorm can be very beautiful. All right, let's see what is going to happen for you today with Craig.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Fancy getting your hands on a whole wodge of cash? Well, you've got a chance at least with the Great British Giveaway. It's our biggest cash prize ever.
£36,000 could be yours, and that would be like having an extra £3,000 tax-free in your bank account each month for an entire year.
Oh, it's a lovely thought, isn't it? And if you fancy making it yours, here's how you could do it.
This is your chance to...
Get this, space technology in the materials of running clothes to help athletes perform at their ultimate capacity. I'm not sure if I believe this, but we'll find out in a sec. Trailblazing scientists, engineers and designers at British firm Rheon Labs have taken an idea first used in a NASA project, and they've now developed it for over 15 years at Imperial College in London.
First of all, please can you explain to us a bit more about how and what this incredible technology is?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, our founder, Dr. Dan Plant, spent many years developing these kind of dynamic materials. That means they behave in what's called non-Newtonic way. So they don't follow the rules. Effectively, they can change their behavior depending on kind of stress or stretch you apply to it. So what you get on an athlete level, if you imagine you have a garment, it's supercharged. It's such that the garment changes its support depending on your movement or your activity or the speed at which you run.
So you're saying that it generates, what, more sort of kinetic energy, is that right?
Not quite. It makes you effectively make more out of your own energy. Spot the athletes with the wavy curves and stripes, you'll see that. So that's super polymer we have in combination with these stripes that are kind of built around the way your muscles moves.
You said the difference between first and fourth place is a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, that's the very main difference it makes. So even if you manage to kind of make more of your own energy and improve your performance by 1%, that's the difference between podium and non-podium.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the National Trust is coming under fire after it announced plans to make half of the menu vegan across its 300 cafes. Why half of it? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. I don't like it, but...
You don't like it?
No, I mean, I don't mind people having different options, but I'm not convinced that the Well, you know, I think I won't give my opinion yet. Let's go straight to our debate instead.
Yeah. Farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones joins us, along with Donica McCarthy from the Climate Media Coalition. Good to see you both this morning. Gareth, why shouldn't it be 50% vegan?
It's just embarrassing, you know, for the National Trust to own 250,000 hectares of land. They have 1,300 tenanted farms. Most of them will be similar to this, producing livestock, dairy, you know, to turn their cafes into 50% vegan. It's embarrassing, you know, and they're talking about net zero. This grass grows, and every time it grows, it sequences carbon back into the land. It's part of the balance of nature. It's part of our country, because look at the temperate climate we have here. It's just raining a little bit. The grass is growing. We can produce fantastic dairy products and meat from this land. And who's going to be supplying this vegan food into their shops? Who is it? They're going to be flying broad beans from Africa and avocados from Mexico. It's a flipping joke, to be honest with you, and it's very frustrating as a farmer to see such a big organisation trying to spin this around to be net zero.
Donica, that's the point, isn't it? That you could have locally sourced beef, for example, or dairy from farms that are on National Trust properties that don't have to come a long way, instead of, say, almonds flown or avocados flown all the way from California, where instead of having the biodiversity here in the UK, you have monocultures out in places like California where the almond farming caused a drought.
I think we need to actually look at the facts on this case. The National Trust is a democratic organisation. The members are able to put forward proposals at their annual general and they're voted on. And the members have proposed that they should move from 40% to 50% plant-based diet, which is healthier for people, cuts carbon emissions, and the most important thing, I think, in a country of nature lovers. You referred to wildlife. Britain is the most wildlife-deprived country, seventh worst most wildlife-deprived nation on earth. What has happened is we have subsidised farmers like Gareth to basically raise meat that actually is incredibly inefficient. It takes 100 kilograms of plant protein to produce 5 kilograms of meat protein. It's incredibly inefficient, and it's estimated our overconsumption of meat costs the NHS £18 billion a year. So what the NHS is doing, it's a really important issue, because 33% of our carbon emissions comes from the food production, and 70% of that comes from meat, like the sheep and cows that Evan's talking about.
OK, Gareth?
Gareth's talking about. Let me tell you something. The land behind me would not grow anything else except grass, OK? So I think you're talking rubbish, to be totally honest with you. And this grass and the Carneddau mountain range is 27,000 acres where these sheep graze over the summer. This place is surrounded by wildlife, some of the rarest flora and fauna you can have across Great Britain.
Gareth, that's not true.
The farmers here
go on,
are working the land
hold on a minute, Gareth.
Sustainable.
Gareth, that's not true.
Hold on, Donica says that isn't true.
Look,
Why,
the tragedy of sheep farming is that the sheep eat everything, and it doesn't allow the regeneration of our natural temperate rainforest. You're surrounded by rain. That should be a rainforest. And Wales, most of Wales is an ecological disaster. And what we need to do is to ensure that farmers like you get a good income by having biodiverse friendly farming and actually ecotourism. So what we need to move away from is the system where we have to pour huge amounts of taxpayer money into subsidising an industry to subsidise Welsh lamb going to French restaurants. That needs to end. What we need is good incomes for farmers and protect our wildlife and reduce our carbon emissions and be healthier.
You are living in cloud cuckoo land. I'll tell you something. My family's been on this farm for 375 years, producing top quality protein, which is lamb and beef behind me. We've got some of the rarest flora and fauna on the mountain. We've got montane heath, we've got blanket bogs, we've got heather. You can come up and I will educate you. You have been told and spun a story that you don't understand because you're living in an ivory tower listening to some environmentalists that are trying to clear families from this land.
I come from a family. I come from a family of farmers.
I am doing something
Gareth.
by feeding people in a sustainable way.
My father grew up on a farm. My uncles own farms. I am from farming stock.
Chronicler, let me ask you this. So Gareth presumably knows his land better than you do and its biodiversity, but he's made a point there about lamb and beef farming. Presumably, with the use of vegan food, if we return back to the point about the National Trust, that a lot of that, particularly fake meat, is not necessarily better for you, is it? Because it's highly processed food. So surely it's actually better for human beings to eat what they're supposed to in lamb and beef and natural proteins, rather than trying to get their nutrition from artificially over-processed vegan food.
You're right. Over-processed food, whether it's meat or plant-based, is a problem. If you add a huge amount of salt and preservatives and sugar to food, it's bad for your health. But most plant-based food is not highly processed. We're talking about vegetables, we're talking about potatoes, we're talking about all those fruit and vegetables. Those are not highly processed. And actually, what we're talking about here with the National Trust is actually 50% of the menu will still be meat-based. We're not excluding meat eaters. What we need to do is reduce the amount of meat. And actually, the studies show that 50% of the British public are already moving towards reducing the amount of meat and dairy in their diets because they know it's good for their health and good for wildlife. And actually, that's where we need to be moving.
All right, you get the last word on this, Gareth.
Let me tell you something about the National Trust. They are putting pressure on family farms to grow trees, and they are taking livestock numbers, not only in their cafes, but on the farms as well. They're a disgrace, and they need to be taken up on this because they are sending people out. They are sending people out of their houses and their farms.
It's a national treasure, the National Trust.
Can hit net zero. Absolute disgrace.
OK, there we go. Gareth Wyn-Jones, we've got to leave it there in beautiful Snowdonia, and Donnacha McCarthy in this less beautiful studio. Good to see you both this morning. I'm sure you've got a say on that. gbnews.com/yoursay. Let us know what you think.
I think I'm going to eat some more meat in protest.
OK, we've got Aidan with the sport in a minute.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Aidan's got the sport. Good morning.
Good morning to you both again.
Yes, I know, it feels like you've never been away. Let's talk about the football last night, should we?
Why not? Yeah, let's focus on...
Did you feel vindicated, first and foremost?
For Lee Carsley not singing the anthem, or did I feel as if I won the argument?
Because you said if we win, no one's going to care.
Well, there's less of a fuss around it today. No one's really talking about it as much on the radio stations I've listened to. There's some coverage in the paper, but I think that most of that was arranged before the game. Harry Redknapp has weighed in, saying that if in fact, let me find it for you. I did box it off for us, didn't I, earlier on? But he sort of was contacted by...
See, I dare anyone to disagree with Harry Redknapp.
Yeah, that's true. Let's have a look. See, did I... Yeah, he's... Oh, well, there you go. Back to what I did a couple of hours ago. He said, it doesn't matter where you're from. For me, if you're in charge of an England team, you should sing the national anthem in 99% of circumstances, at least. So this is the background to the story. Lee Carsley was asked...
I wonder what that 1% of circumstances is.
Well, I think he's talking about Lee Carsley. He's saying that it's difficult because he's going into the Aviva Stadium in Dublin, where, of course, he is in the backyard of the country he made 40 appearances for. He played in a World Cup there. His grandmother was born in Cork. And he doesn't... I mean, it's no different to Declan Rice yesterday choosing not to celebrate his goal for England, because he has 3 caps for the Republic of Ireland, and it's kind of the same, isn't it? I mean, I've personally, when it comes to goal celebrations, I think that's slightly different. I think you should... I don't like it when players celebrate... Sorry, I don't like it when players don't celebrate goals because, out of respect to the team they've scored against, because they used to play for them. I just think that's, if you're doing a bit of a disservice to the fans that you're currently representing.
So is this just because he's in Dublin, or has Carsley not sung the English national anthem elsewhere? Was he maybe worried he was going to get booed? Or something?
It wasn't that. What it was, Emma, was he never sung the national anthem even when he played for the Republic of Ireland. So he felt it interfered with his pre-match ritual. Some players can take it or leave it. I mean, Roy Keane, when he played for the Republic of Ireland, and even when he played for Man United in some big FA Cup finals and other big domestic matches, he said, I don't like all this process of meeting dignitaries and things. I just want to get on with the game. Now, there aren't many players who'd verbalise that, especially nowadays, because they'd get a backlash for it. But I can understand how some of them might feel. They've been spending weeks and months preparing for particular games or tournaments, and then sometimes the slightest thing can put you off your game. I mean, Roy Keane actually said that organising tickets for his family used to put him off his game all the time. So they want to... There's tunnel... He said he kicked off the 1991 FA Cup final for Nottingham Forest against Tottenham. It was 10 minutes into the match, and he was worried about whether his brother got into the game.
So many players are from all over the world now.
Yes.
That if people didn't sing the national anthem because the players felt they had some kind of ambiguity over it, then the team wouldn't be singing the national anthem.
But not when you're in the national
Stephen
team,
thinks it's different if you're the manager as well. I mean, lots of players don't sing it and haven't done so. Well, it's not really been a big issue. I mean, some of them belt it out, like Stuart Pearce and Paul Ince and people like that, but others have just not done so.
Harry Kane.
Harry Kane, yeah,
Harry Kane.
Well, Harry Redknapp had his say anyway, but on the pitch... I mean, you couldn't have written it any better. The two guys he scored, who used to play for Ireland and received a bit of flack on the day, ended up scoring both the goals. And there was a picture in the stands in reference to St Patrick trying to keep the snakes out of Ireland. He said they held up a picture with Rice and Grealish on either side of it, and in the middle it said the snakes have returned.
Yeah. We're down to our 1 minute, Aidan, and our last chance today to talk about the Paralympics.
Oh, wonderful. Well, why not? I mean, look, we're almost at the end of the event. 20 medals won yesterday, 5 of those gold. Some outstanding individual performances as well. Hannah Cockcroft in the 800 metres winning a gold, her 9th Paralympic title. Success In canoeing as well, which I wouldn't have predicted, Emma Wiggs winning gold alongside Charlotte Henshaw. And in the butterfly final in the swimming, where we've been absolutely outstanding, Stephen Clegg winning gold there as well. And if you look at the table just on your screen there, for the benefit of our radio listeners, China in front as expected, Great Britain with 120 and 47 golds. Quite outstanding, and a promise of more to come today, perhaps.
Yeah.
I didn't do my homework from the last hour. I was meant to check how many we can win today, sorry.
No, it's all right, it don't matter.
All right.
we're well within target. We're 100 to 140, and we're 120, so whatever we win today is...
I just said for the benefit of our radio listeners.
And that made me laugh, yeah.
Why?
Because you do it every bulletin. There's always something you say.
Well, I want to keep
it...
You've got to keep the radio listeners involved.
They're involved. They're listening. We're right in their ear holes.
But anyway, what's really important is that we beat the French.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can all go along with that. Great.
Just tried to wind you up.
Dear me. Lovely French.
Great to see you this weekend.
Oh, thanks. All right, get out. All right, we're taking you through the papers in just a moment.
What are you going to say?
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, Charlie. This is about Anglican Church, the Church of England, dropping the word church in favour of something a bit more modern sounding. Words such as community. Why are we afraid of the word church?
Well, that's my question. I mean, you've got to assume that they think it solves some kind of problem. But I think, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about their particular religious institution, whatever they all have different names, don't they? And if you rename one, do you have to rename all of them? Can we no longer use an individual name for different religions' community buildings?
Are you religious?
I'm spiritual.
You sound like him. Yeah.
No, certainly.
Oh, don't get any started on me.
Do I believe in a God? Yes. Do I believe in any of the particular gods that are offered to us? Still undecided.
I'm like you. I said exactly that.
You two are the same. You two are exactly
What about you, Anna? Are you particularly religious?
Well, I'm not proper religious. I won't name myself as a religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society?
Yes.
We're moving more and more towards that. The Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious.
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. So if people are going to find solace and peace and a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Right, time for the papers this morning with Suzanne Evans and Andy Jones. Andy, showing your age by picking this story in The Sun on Sunday. Yobs.
Well, it's a very serious story. We are all affected by kid yobs. I think anybody who's ever been pretty much held hostage by child behaviour in a restaurant or a plane or whatever else.
That's not the same as yobs.
Well, no, I mean, it's a part of a serious problem of child discipline and how we discipline children. The number of child yobs prosecuted for violent attacks rocketed by 30% last year. This is instances where a child aged under 14 has attacked another child or an adult and it's ended up in court. So, look, they're very keen not to take children to court, aren't they? So, I mean, these are obviously very serious instances. They're up to 440 last year. The Home Office has said they're rolling out a new Young Futures programme which will help stop this, whatever that means. I don't know how youth clubs and table tennis and things like this are particularly helpful for these kids.
It's not more youth clubs and whatnot, is it?
No, but a serious instance. There must have been 5 or 6 instances this year where children have either been found guilty or arrested and charged for the murder of an adult or another child. There was an 18-year-old stabbed to death in Staffordshire by 2 12 and 13-year-olds. There's a horrible case of the 80-year-old pensioner who was... obviously, they've only been arrested at this stage. A 14-year-old has been charged. And there's various sort of gang instances where 14,
but there's a difference between that and yobbish behaviour.
Well, doesn't one lead to the other?
But it all feeds into the other, doesn't it?
This is the kind of argument, isn't it? If you don't have parental discipline, if young people know they've got the upper hand when they're at a young age, they're only going to escalate out of control and it's going to spiral. I
think discipline's the wrong word.
What do you think it should be?
I think it's respect.
Well, nobody's got respect for their older people
You've
anymore.
You've got to discipline
really,
respect,
parents.
haven't you? I was in a bookshop the other day and I saw a woman trying to negotiate with a toddler, and the toddler was kicking off. And I just thought, you just assert yourself over the child. That's the way that you prevent their behaviour from escalating, surely.
Yeah. Absolutely right. You know, and children also like this. If a child's going to thrive, it's got to be disciplined in an atmosphere of love. It's got to have a routine. And loads of people don't have routine. It's got to have boundaries. Absolutely.
Because kids push against boundaries.
And I'm
afraid, know where the boundaries are.
You know, some kind of dreamt-up government programme is not going to help at all.
Of course it is.
Speaking of boundaries, here's a sidestep and a half. ULEZ, the ULEZ expansion, Suzanne.
Yes.
What's this all about?
So this is a story about Sadiq Khan, London Mayor's ULEZ expansion, which was supposed to lower pollution levels, according to a study by Bromley Council, which measured the carbon dioxide emissions across nitrogen dioxide emissions across all 32 London boroughs. It's not worked. It's gone up. Now, why is that a surprise? It's a surprise because it's the complete opposite of what was intended. I suspect it might have something, and this is my own personal opinion, I suspect it has something to do with reducing traffic flows down to 20 miles per hour as well.
Keeps the cars on the road for longer.
Keeps cars on the roads for longer. The slower they go, the more pollution they are emitting. It's a complete...
Do we believe this or not? Because... we're also told the ULEZ expansion has been so successful in cutting down air pollution, the reduction in nitrogen oxide is as if we'd removed 200,000 cars.
Oh, really?
Well, it's tosh, isn't it? It's absolute rubbish, as is also the claim by Sadiq Khan that it's saving the lives of 4,000 Londoners each year. I mean, that, too, is, I'm afraid, just spin.
These are never cited, are they,
it's
these
nonsense.
claims? There's never any basis.
Would like to
and the other thing is,
this
isn't just a London story, because obviously they're talking about bringing these sort of ULEZ, low-traffic things all around the country. Yeah. And increased cycle lanes. I'm not against cycle lanes, but there are certain roads, particularly in our sort of ancient, historical cities, where you just can't have cycle lanes because there's not room. And then you end up with this situation where you have tailbacks of traffic while you're sat there looking at an empty bus lane, empty cycle lane. Ambulances can't get through, police cars can't get through.
Can be a nightmare.
Large lorries to supply, shops, etc., can't get through. There isn't any common sense. It's about dogma and ideology rather than social impact.
And in a similar vein, there's this story about the smoking ban at race courses.
Yeah, so there's discussion. Obviously, Sir Keir Starmer had this position where he's banning smoking in smoking gardens, smoking areas, outside pubs. I don't know how pubs are going to enforce what goes on outside their pubs anyway. But the Shadow Secretary for Sport is warning Keir Starmer not to make the decision of banning smoking at things like music festivals and horse racing tracks. Horse racing brings 4.2 billion to the national economy every single year, and horse racing, unlike say say, going to the football where you don't smoke for 2 hours. You're on a racetrack, as you know, for sort of 6 or 7 hours. And so people just won't go.
Let's have a look at this picture. Have we got a picture? Yeah, page 93.
We got a picture of...
well, it's here we go. It's Arthur Daly. There's Arthur Daly on the right there.
Which of our panel's that? That's not me, is it?
That's my friend Stephen George Hilly and me at Royal Ascot, smoking a cigar. I'm very upset by taking my hat off by this stage, but Ascot would lose so much money if you banned smoking on the racecourses, because everybody likes a big, fat cigar at Ascot.
It's nanny statery, though, isn't
nanny
it?
Statery. Nanny state writ large, once again.
And the point of this is, none of this was in the manifesto either. They've only been in a couple of months. Instead of chasing down some of their manifesto pledges, we're already on these, what I would consider sort of culture war stuff. And I don't really think this is going to be saving lives anyway.
Picked up
the idea that someone...
Conservative policy, haven't they, and then just stretched it further.
Quite. The Conservatives don't have a leg to stand on this because they were attacking this same point.
Yeah,
but I don't think anybody is going to be stood on the wide expanse of Ascot Racecourse or Cheltenham Racecourse inhaling second and third hand smoke.
Well, look, as I say, Arthur Daly would be spinning in his grave because he can't have a cigar at the races, he can't have a drink, and he can't drive his lovely motor.
Maybe I'll take up smoking.
Right, we're out of time. Good to see you both. Here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us it will be feeling a little bit fresher, with highs in the south potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
Which is why Prosecco tastes different from other sparkling wines.
Prosecco will taste much more fruity because you don't have the thing called lees aging. Insert the wine with brioche, biscuity, toasty flavours and aromas, which makes it much more complex.
Here we've got a thing called Journey's End.
Yes.
And would you like to tell us, I've said that people didn't want to splash out on champers. They might want to go the Cap Classique route.
Yes.
What would they be saving? How much might that cost in a shop?
So this one here will cost you about £17. So it is considerably, I guess, better value for money than champagne.
But I'd also comment that it's probably a good deal cheaper than English sparkling wine, which is interesting.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, this second one is called Kleiner Salzer.
It is, yes.
And you told me this is a little more expensive.
It is. It is.
What price were we talking about here?
About 20.
About 20.
Yes.
Not vastly more.
No.
Are we going to taste £3 worth of improvement? Oh, and by the way, it went so beautifully with the cheese, just as you advised. Our South African sparkling wines, Cap Classique, are they pretty well available in English wine shops, British wine shops?
They are, yes. You can find them in all of the supermarkets. Growing Beck, and that's on offer at the moment, actually. That's $11.99 from Waitrose, which is exceptional value.
That is insane.
Yes, it is. And you can also, so I bought with me today, so this is a Pinot Noir only, so that's a rosé sparkling.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning. The nation remembers Britain's longest reigning monarch as today marks 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II died.
And Charles will spend the day at Balmoral reflecting on the second anniversary of his succession to the throne.
The Prime Minister plays the blame game as he says the Conservatives are responsible for the broken NHS.
And the annual trade union meeting gets underway in Brighton as the TUC members claim workers are being cheated out of holiday pay.
Now the countdown's on to the TV debate on Tuesday between President Trump and Vice President Harris. But it's not without controversy as Trump hits out at Harris's friendship with the TV network's boss.
And as the National Trust announces plans to make half of its cafes vegan, we've debated whether the move is unfair to farmers and perhaps slightly hypocritical.
And as one man sets out to become the first person to visit every parish in England, we find out why.
Good morning. It's going to be a very wet day with some thunderstorms across central and southern parts of the UK. Find out all the weather details with me coming up in a little bit.
Just gone 9 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Emma Trimble, and this is GB News Breakfast.
Well, there is a lot to get through in the next half hour, so let's crack on with remembering Queen Elizabeth II. 2 years today since she died, and what a legacy to remember. King Charles and Queen Camilla will spend today at Crathy Kirk, where the Queen worshipped. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker reflects on that September day.
Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old.
She was like a real inspiration.
She's been very diligent and honourable.
Sending thoughts and prayers to the family and hope, that the transition goes quite smoothly.
It's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne.
Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
Her eldest son became King Charles III, pledging himself to the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
His Majesty's time on the throne has seen celebration, state visits and health scares. The latest YouGov polling suggests 2/3 of the people believe Britain should continue to have a monarchy. Hardly any change since Charles became king, who himself has favourability ratings of 63%. A master of soft diplomacy, the King's overseas visits to France, Germany and Kenya were deemed big successes, cementing Great Britain's place on the world stage. The King was also the first British monarch to address the German Parliament, paying tribute to the deep historical bonds.
Today, it gives me particular pride to be with you once again, now as King, and to renew the special bond of friendship between our two countries.
Despite being 75 years old, the King has continued to throw himself into charity work alongside his constitutional duties. His Majesty launched the Coronation Food Project to support charities feeding disadvantaged Brits. Mindful of the extra money he's made from the Crown Estate's wind farm projects, His Majesty's asked that the profits be redirected to the wider public good.
King Charles is due to go to hospital for the treatment of an enlarged prostate.
The surgery was successful, but further tests diagnosed His Majesty with a separate form of cancer. He was forced to step back from public duties, something his nephew Peter Phillips said deeply frustrated him. The Queen suggested it was difficult to get him to rest instead of overworking himself.
You haven't got too cold.
In April, a glimmer of hope emerged when His Majesty met members of the public on Easter Sunday at Windsor ahead of a phased return to public duties. His first engagement since his cancer diagnosis was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in London, becoming a new patron of Cancer Research UK. Doctors have now given the King the green light to travel to Australia and Samoa next month for an autumn tour, suggesting his health is stable. Yesterday, the King attended the annual Braemar gathering. Today, His Majesty is marking his accession day privately, in the place his reign began. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Quite an anniversary, isn't it? Right, lots to talk about in the world of politics today. The NHS is falling apart. Well, we sort of know that anyway, but it's all the Tories' fault, according to Sir Keir Starmer. Well, I guess he's going to say that, isn't he, come what may. Camilla Tominey is here, ahead of her show at 9:30. Good morning.
Lovely to see you in the flesh.
And you.
And on the NHS, you've got a very interesting guest coming on your show.
Well, we've got Wes Streeting coming on, who I think has been lined up to do this morning's broadcast round on the back of this report that's been put together by Lord Darcy. Should be mentioned at this stage that it's being described as an independent report, but Lord Darcy was a health minister under Gordon Brown. And what do we think of this narrative of it's all the Tories' fault? That's going to be a message that's going to be banged on about by Labour for some time.
They've got a point with the NHS, though, haven't they?
Not in Wales.
Well, no, not in Wales.
It's
not
like,
in Wales.
is the NHS just in a bad state across the UK, regardless of who governs it? Because we've had successive problems. We've had COVID. We've had, I suppose you could argue, a sort of militarisation of junior doctors, which has contributed to strikes, which has contributed to even longer waiting lists. We've got an ageing population. We have, as the statistics that are put in the Labour press release point out, got an obesity crisis, particularly among children. But then you have to ask yourself, is that a Tory problem, particularly in relation to children, or is it a smartphone problem, for instance? Do you know what I mean? So I get the whole point of the politics of saying it's all the Tories' fault. What I'm wondering, not least having seen Starmer's approval rating tank since he came into office, is all of this negativity actually working for them?
Do you think this is also part of the justification for a lot of these other health measures they want to bring in as a kind of way of protecting the NHS?
I just think it's authoritarian socialism, to be honest, Emma. I mean, I think that Starmer, did you know he was a former director of public prosecution?
Oh, funny that.
He doesn't like talking about it, but he's just somebody who likes people to follow the rules and he wants to ban things. There makes no sense, by the way, banning vaping, particularly outdoors. A, because there's no passive smoking risk, and B, because it's meant to be a smoking cessation device. So that doesn't make sense. But I think it's also, of course, this narrative about the Tories have made everything worse and we're having to repair the damage justifies some of the policies and decisions that they've made. So the cut to the winter fuel allowance, they're saying it's on the back of this 22 billion black hole, but the counter-narrative to that is you can always choose what you spend, what little money you have on. If you're going to give... I thought actually Rishi Sunak did quite well at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, making that clear point that you are taking away from pensioners to give to already well-remunerated train drivers. And it's not great politics for Labour, is it?
They've turned this report around very quickly as well, haven't they? So how in-depth is this? Are we expecting this to be?
Have you seen this report? Because they're speaking about the report. As far as I can tell, I haven't actually seen a copy. The report's not published till Thursday. So they're preempting a report that nobody's actually seen in full, which is interesting. Other good stories in the papers, and I'm not just going to be speaking to Wes Streeting about all of this, but I've got former Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser on. That's interesting because she lost her seat in Cambridgeshire because reform stood. So she lost by a minimal amount of votes. She was one of those Tories that was forced out. Going to be asking her about the Tory leadership race. There's some stories in the papers about dirty tricks and manoeuvrings between Robert Jenrick's camp and Cleverly's, and can Kemi Baig not make it into the final four and all the rest of it.
Does anybody care?
Well,
outside of the Westminster bubble, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to reform because if they do elect a righty to be the next Tory leader, then that does sort of neutralise the threat from Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, who's also coming into the studio today. He wants to talk about the VAT on private school fees policy by Labour, which today is in the newspapers because one mum of an autistic child, I think you've covered it this morning, has launched a legal action against it, saying this discriminates against my child. Labour have said there'll be an exclusion for children with special educational needs if they have this EHCP certificate, which is kind of like the formalisation of their condition. The trouble is, only very few children in the private sector have that certificate. 100,000 don't. So this mum is saying, look, on behalf of kids with special educational needs, you're threatening us with higher fees we can't afford. Our schools might close down. What should we do with our children?
It's just like the pensioners and the winter fuel allowance. It's all inside out and back to front.
It's weird that Labour is attacking the two most vulnerable groups in society right now, children and elderly people.
I mean, there was a story yesterday about one woman who can't... So she says her kids have got to be out of private school now because she can't afford it. But Buckinghamshire Council said, well, you need to justify, show us why you can't afford it.
Yeah, that was...
Rather than saying you've got an innate right to have
And that was a crazy story. It's actually in the Telegraph. Great paper, that. I do recommend everyone reads it. But it was also making this point, you know, this idea of having this right to education. When I've grilled successive, at the time, shadow ministers, now actual ministers, on this subject and said, where are you going to accommodate the kids that inevitably leave private schools to go into state schools? I get this kind of Bridget Phillipson saying, oh, there are 650,000 free spaces in schools. Well, not in the southeast there aren't. In places like Buckinghamshire, where I live in Hertfordshire, because I've spoken to people in admissions offices, they're saying we have been inundated with inquiries. The other nonsense thing about this, by the way, is the decision to introduce it in January. Why would you introduce a policy in the middle of a school year? That means that you've then got parents in the middle of a school year taking their children out rather than next September, which could be planned for. Doesn't make any sense. So I'll be asking Wes Streeting that. Who else have I got on the show? Victoria Atkins. I think she might come out. She's the former Health Secretary, so she'll have something to say about the Lord Darcy report. Also, I have a feeling, because Tim Shipman's written it in the Sunday Times, that she is going to come out for Robert Jenrick, which is really interesting, because Atkins has always been very much of the one nation ready for Rishi camp. And she's now going to flock to Jenrick, who is positioning himself on the right. That's just quite intriguing. Why not support the only woman left in the race, Kemi Badenoch? I shall be asking her that later.
Very interesting.
Is that because Jenrick is actually quite one nation? He just seems to be...
Well, he's positioning is doing the heavy lifting there. He's positioning himself.
He's a Remainer that is now apparently a Eurosceptic. He used to be nicknamed Robert Generic. I did say this to him face-to-face when we had him in the studio, because we've managed to interview all of the leadership candidates so far except Tom Tugendhat. And he's basically appealing... The fight now is for the Priti Patel supporters. So those 14 people that didn't quite get her over the threshold for the first round, she left last week.
You would think, though, that the support of Tory Wets for Jenrick's campaign would not necessarily play into the way that he is trying to position himself with the membership.
There's no escaping Tory Wets, because even at Kemi Badenoch...
There are so many of them.
There's so many of them. Some of them were they've been at all the launches because they are still part of that 121 MPs. You know, the One Nations will always be a caucus, but this is about thinking to themselves not only who can beat Starmer, but who can beat Farage, and I think that's an important question for Conservatives right now.
Which way, Conservatives?
Who's going to give them a job?
Well, yeah, but would you want it? This is the other funny thing. They're all fighting like rats in a sack to be in opposition for 4 years, where they're basically invisible, fighting over shadow jobs. I mean, they're all going to get a job. There's only 121 of them.
Well,
no, it really is rats in a sack, isn't it?
All right, Camilla, thank you very much indeed. See you later on. Now, a new report says that more than 1 million workers were denied annual leave last year, and that meant £2 billion in lost holiday pay.
Well, today, the Trade Union Congress holds its annual meeting in Brighton. Wages and winter fuel payments will be top on the agenda. So are the unions set to put even more pressure on Keir Starmer to meet their demands?
Let's talk to our reporter Adam Cherry, who's in Brighton. Morning, Adam.
Good morning, guys. Yes, welcome to Brighton.
Of these claims that are being made about this $2 billion in lost holiday pay?
Yeah, so this is new research published today, commissioned by the TUC, saying that over 1 million people, as a result of denied annual leave, have lost up to £2 billion in annual leave pay entitlement for reasons such as just simply the leave being denied to them, refusing to, or rather being reluctant to apply for it because they think it will disadvantage them in their future career prospects, or for various other reasons related to those sorts of issues. So it gives you a flavour of what this conference is going to be about, the kind of things that are going to shape the debate for the new Labour government in the next few years. Of course, this is the first trade union conference since, for about 15 years since Labour were last in power. So they're going to have a real strong voice here. The Prime Minister himself will be here on Tuesday, delivering his speech on the same day that MPs vote in the House of Commons whether to withdraw the winter fuel payment for millions of pensioners. Of course, the context for that is important because that's part of the reason they've done that is because they've had to give, or they've argued they've had to give, above inflation pay rises for public sector workers, which is something that people arriving at this conference, thousands of delegates or thousands of people and hundreds of delegates have campaigned for a very long time. So that's the parameters of the debate. Will they be a strong voice on the government? How will the government respond? Ellie Reeves is the first government minister to make her speech. She gives her speech later this afternoon. So that will give us a flavour of which direction this is going to go.
Adam, thanks very much indeed.
Well, now it is time for the Great British Giveaway, the biggest cash prize we have ever given away.
Yeah, it's £36,000. It could be yours tax-free, but you've got to be in it to win it. Here are all the details.
This is your... Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Angela, what have we got?
Hello, there's an awful lot, but I think the main interesting thing is that Prince Harry said a week or so, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, that he absolutely wasn't going to go to his uncle's funeral because there wasn't enough protection for him. His uncle, Lord Fellows, was married to Jane Spencer, who was Diana's sister, who was the most practical and helpful of the three children, the three girls, and she's done an awful lot for Harry. I thought it was just terrible. He wasn't going to go there, but he has been there. They didn't talk to William. William didn't talk to him. Did he get any protection? Who knows? And if he didn't, if he takes the government to court yet again, they would say, well, look, we managed without that, but we don't know about that. But also the paper, the magazine that does loads for Harry and Meghan, they were the ones who said he wasn't going, so they said what he wanted them to say.
He doesn't need any protection. I mean, how did he get there? Probably in a Bombardier private jet that gives off 60 times more carbon than anybody else.
Yes, well, we don't know about that. The good thing was that he was there, and of course today is Remembrance Day for Diana, the day she died. So that he went there and he was with her side of the family, and I think that that's very good and might help him feel a bit better about things.
But neither of them are doing well out of it. William is not doing well out of it. Harry is not doing well out of it. The King is not doing well out of it. Meghan Markle's not doing well out of it. Why can't they just...
No, I don't think it's that easy. I think that they might do much worse if they were together again.
GB News, the People's Channel. Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, did you know there is a man on a mission to visit all 10,000 civil parishes in England?
Andy Smith, a YouTuber known as the Village Idiot, has visited 1,300 parishes so far. He's reached a special milestone this weekend when he ticked off his last civil parish in East Riding.
Yeah, it sounds extraordinary, doesn't it? But I say he's determined to do it, and Anna Riley has the story.
Andy Smith from Lincolnshire, a dream within his heart. A man with a camera, visits miles apart. Every parish in England, his journey so grand. The Village Idiot travels across this fine land.
Meet Andy Smith, the Village Idiot YouTuber. He's aiming to become the first person to complete a unique geographical challenge.
So we're in Boroughbridge today, and this is probably about the 1,300th parish I've visited so far. There are 10,474 in this country. It's going to take me about 30 years to get around them all. I've been doing it for about 3.5 years. When I say the word parish, I mean political entities. I don't mean ecclesiastical. So we're not talking churches here. We're talking the lowest form of local government. And the idea is just basically to go around and check out all the history and chronicle it all and put it all on YouTube and see if people are interested in it.
Andy now has more than 10,500 subscribers. He works part-time so that he can accomplish his weekly YouTube tours, chronicling village life.
You rely on each other in a village. Certainly from my experience, everybody seems to know everybody in a village. If you go to a big town or a big city, you might see someone walking down the street, you've got no idea who they are. You do that in a village and you think, oh, it's Bob from down the road. I wonder how he's doing today. It's just a different way of life, and it's cool to see how different people live in different parts of the country too.
Remembering the history of civil parishes is an important part of Andy's quest.
It's the kind of thing that can get sort of forgotten in today's modern world, because, you know, we're so reliant on the internet these days. All this general history seems to disappear and no one really cares much about it. And so, in a way, with me doing this, it kind of preserves it, I suppose. I'm not the be-all and end-all, because there are much better historians out there than me, I'm sure. But without people such like as me, it will just get forgotten.
Andy's now 40 years old. He expects to be 68 by the time he completes his mammoth mission. Anna Riley, GB News, Boroughbridge.
God, I love people like Andy.
Do you?
Yeah, I think it's... I mean, I love people who are interested in local history and actually make the effort to kind of go out there and keep those things alive.
I don't know why you'd want to do it for 30 years.
30 years is a bit of a long slog, but imagine that dedication. I wonder if he'll make it. He's going to be in his 60s by the time he's finished.
Yeah, yeah, it might all die a death.
Do you not find it a bit exciting? I think it's a bit exciting. I've been more interested in the religious parishes than the civil ones, but it's still, I mean, it's so fascinating. He'll uncover so many little sort of local gems that people have otherwise forgotten.
Well, according to Anthony Moore, who's been in touch this morning, the only thing I will get excited about is Wes Streeting coming on Camilla's show. Bet Stephen can't contain himself, he says, as his pin-up boy, Wes Streeting, is coming in.
That's a horrible thought.
He's not my... I tell you why I like Wes Streeting. And it's nothing to do with politics in that sense. It's because he's a member of the government who comes on to GB News. That's why I like him, because he will come on, and a lot of them just won't.
And he's definitely in for a grilling with Camilla.
Oh, he'll get a grilling, and so you should.
She's so good at holding people to account.
But that's the point. You've got to, whether you're in government or opposition, you need to put yourself up to be questioned and challenged. And there you go. And he does it. That's why I like him. It's nothing to do with politics.
Well, that's it from...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many